if you are just catching up. So there is a debate that has been raging through our society on lab leak. I don't know why, but broadly, a bunch of people like Joe Rogan have been saying, oh my God, all the conspiracy theorists were right about everything. I think that they were wrong about basically everything, so I don't know how that can ever be stated. And then more specifically, related to lab leak stuff, for some reason, people seem to think that lab leak, the theory of it leaking from a lab has been increasingly validated over the past few years. But my surface level understanding was that no new information whatsoever has come out relating to, relating it all to validating that it leaked from a lab. I don't think that anything else had come out. Some people said that it did, like some governments made statements, but there was no new scientific data, there was no new evidence presented, it was just some people just said that. In 2023, some guy called Rootclaim made some alternative way, well, way earlier than this, he made some alternative way of doing debate to where he says he can weigh evidence in special ways and he's able to determine what's real and what's not real, sometimes even better than academics can. And he gives a couple examples of this, which I don't think are really relevant, but then he stakes $100,000 that lab leak is real and he wants to debate anybody on it who'll take him up on it. And then some guy who is some autodidact, I don't think much formal educational background decides that, hey, okay, well, I'll do it. I'll debate you on this. Peter describes himself as a physics student, programmer, and mountaineer who obsessively researches random topics. Johnny Harris has a video where he argues in favor of the lab leak theory. Oh boy, maybe we'll watch that tonight. A new video or the one 4 years ago? Has a video where he argues in favor of the lab leak theory. This one's old as fuck. But I'll probably watch a Joe Rogan thing on it because I think that's where most of this stupid information propagates from. So yesterday we watched the opening statements of these two debaters.
An outbreak usually.
This guy is a machine. The mountaineer physics student guy, he, I think, laid out an insanely compelling argument with a lot of really compelling points, most of stuff that I had no idea about. It was just a really, really, really good opening 90-minute statement. Then the Rootclaim guy does his open 90-minute statement, and it's kind of a joke. He uses a lot of very bad math, a lot of very subjective bad interpretations, a lot of very weird, kind of memey, intuitive arguments. I don't know. These were the opening statements of the two. And part two of this debate, I think, is supposed to get into more of the genetics side of things, like the actual mechanism of how did these things, like what is the actual strong, I guess, genetic evidence or medical evidence that it was either leaked from a lab or created in a lab versus of natural origin. So this is the next part of the debate. Do both of them debate in this video?
Then you go...
It sounds like, oh God, these slides, bro. Oh man. Did we confirm, is Scott Alexander the guy who's writing this here, or do other people write on his blog sometimes? Is it always him writing? It should be, right? I believe he wrote this one. Unless they did other. Okay, I'm assuming it's him then. I'm curious how he summarized his first first few videos. 2, 3. He went up to the third one here, so I guess we should watch the third one and then I'll. Well, good luck.
So how is this going to work? You're gonna manually switch the chess clock for us every time we. So okay.
The chess clock.
And we're starting with your questions? What was it?
Oh, they're doing questions. Oh, it's a Q&A back and forth. Oh, shit. Okay.
Decision.
I think we were starting. I was gonna say some things in the rebuttal, and I'm not planning to talk forever. I
Okay.
was gonna do the 5 minutes or less. I don't know. Are we okay with that? Or do we want the judges to go first? Okay. Yeah. So I want to start with Shinfati market because we're in disagreement on that, and that's just one of the last things you're talking about. It sounded like you were saying that's like community transmission that shows up in the market. Is that correct, sir?
I'm not sure I understand the question. I mean,
So one of the big problems here, I actually really like this debate because it exemplifies, like this, one of the things that I say constantly is I'm going to say a whole bunch of things that are red flags that if I hear somebody else say them, I'm assuming they're bullshitting 99% of the time. We're like, oh, do your own research and, you know, be critical of news sources and try to be skeptical of things equal. Like generally when people say any of that shit, they're full of shit. And I love this debate because this guy at the bottom says all of the right things and then does all the wrong things. And this guy at the top doesn't say any of the initial shit he does, but he does all of the right things. Like I hope you try to be like this guy up top. And the guy on the bottom is like the kind of like Tim Pool's basically, like try to be rational and reasonable and then just engage in the most ridiculous form of thought possible.
we're saying that the market was the next major cluster since lockdown.
Yeah, but like, do you think it's in Beijing? Do you think the virus is going around Beijing among people, but then it shows up at the market because markets are a likely place for outbreaks to
Yeah,
start?
so probably.
Oh, I paused for a second because it's funny that one of the other criticisms that I give I've said this a lot for the video essay people is it feels like sometimes if somebody makes a 10-minute video they've said every single thing they know about the particular topic. This guy, based on his responses to the judges' questions, he seems pretty fluent in the material. Like when they had questions about the material, he was able to justify the assertions with underlying facts. Like he was familiar with the research that he was citing. He was familiar with the sources he was citing. The guy on the bottom wasn't able to articulate anything concerning the slides that he had. It almost seemed like he didn't even prepare the presentation, you know?
A few people got infected, and when it got to the market, amplification was faster.
Okay.
Like,
Because do you think it's in Beijing? Do you think the virus is going around Beijing among people, but then it shows up at the market because markets are a likely place for outbreaks to
Yeah,
start?
so probably a few people got infected, and when it got to the market, amplification was faster.
this is a dead in the water argument immediately. And I already know it from the first slides that this guy showed. So his argument in the prior thing was, oh, the reason why some early cases show up at the market is because the market is the most likely place for viruses to transmit. Bullshit. It would definitely be places like malls and stuff. There are places where the amount of humans that are there, the density of the humans that are there, and then the diversification, people from different parts of society that are going to be way higher than wet markets where these foods are bought. I have no idea how he's going to survive. That my guess is that's what the top guy is going to argue. If we look at population density for well-traveled areas, there's no reason to think that the wet market would just be the first place that this would show up at. It would definitely be other places first. But
Okay. So I actually hadn't read that much about this until I saw your slide. So I read a bunch of papers about this weekend. And it was traced to...
oh, until I saw your slide. So their research was available to the other person. That's so bewildering to me. It makes sense for the top guy because I feel like the top guy's slides already responded to everything the bottom guy said, but it feels like the bottom guy, his slides were almost like he was going first. Like they weren't responsive at all to anything from top guy's stuff. So I wonder if he just didn't change it or anything, but okay. Oof. Okay, well.
I saw your slide. So I read a bunch of papers about this weekend. And it was traced to seafood at the market. It was traced to imported seafood in one stall. And then when it got out of the market, the cases clustered on the market. And when you do statistical centering techniques, you get, this is not exactly the same kernel density estimate that they did in Warby, but you get the same result that the outside cases cluster on the market. So we only have 2 data points now. It's Huanan and Shinfati, but they show the same patterns that you get some animal product that comes into a market, and it spreads outside in similar ways. And you get clustering within the market. It's a little better in Shinfati. You know, it's a really nice heat map on the stall that the infected seafood was traced to, and all that imported salmon tested positive. But you do have additional hotspots, so it's not 100% clear. There's some papers that judges can read about the infected salmon, and you gave some numbers about like there's more cases in Shinfati and the ratio is higher. I looked it up. Shinfati is the biggest market in Beijing and actually all of Asia. It's 21 times larger than the Huanan market. It's got 20 times as many visitors, assuming the 10,000 number you said it's 200,000 visitors there. Also, they shut it down really fast. I think the cases were detected June 11th. They closed the market 2 days later. They shut the schools. They canceled flights. So the ratio is going to be higher because you detected a lot more market-linked cases when you shut down the outbreak really fast. So I don't think that proves what you're saying. I think it actually is a really great similarity to the Huanan seafood market. But just in general, I wanted to talk about probabilistic arguments. And I think it's funny that you came up with it's like 1 in 100,000 against zoonosis, and I came up with it's like 60 billion in favor of zoonosis. And what we both did is we just multiplied numbers together. So there's still human bias here, which is you decide which numbers you multiply together. And there's a huge possibility for confirmation bias there.
Yes. Thank you for bringing this up. Yeah, the illusion of using some Bayesian probabilistic calculation, like you've removed human subjectivity when the most important part is picking which numbers you're calculating on, right? The calculations are simple, and that's the easy part, you know?
Where you get attached to one theory and you only pick the numbers for that theory.
Sorry, when you said that the bottom guy says the right thing, do you mean he's better at speaking or saying things that sound good? I mean that he's good at saying, like, don't fall for the sharpshooter fallacy. Don't fall for the preconceived bias fallacy. Don't fall, like he says those things, but then he doesn't follow through with it. He doesn't actually not fall for those things.
For confirmation bias there, where you get attached to one theory and you only pick the numbers for that theory. I don't know how we resolve this when we have two completely different probabilistic estimates. I think what we need to do is fact checking to figure out which numbers are important. And I think your presentation showed why the Rootclaim might be going in the wrong direction here, is you don't do fact checking, and there's a bunch of cases where you messed up here. You said that this December 8th case happened before the market outbreak. Both sides of the debate disagree with that. You got the 2 visitors wrong. You're focused on these early Weibo cases when there really aren't many or maybe any of those in December. You said Warby's data is confounded by population density. You have some theory for why the case search was biased, because it was before January 18th, but actually the cases were found after January 18th, so that there could be some source of bias, but it's not that. And you ignored the early case search where it should be unbiased because it hadn't been identified yet. The excess days, you said something about 90 missing early cases. I can talk about why that's not true. You've also said it's irrelevant.
Now remember, this is back and forth, so I'm sure that the bottom guy is going to have a bunch of facts that the other guy wasn't true about, you know? I'm sure.
COVID started, and I don't think that's true. I mean, when you want to...
Sorry, Peter, can you go back to the previous slide?
This one? Yeah.
The one where you were making claims about fact-checking. I just hadn't finished reading.
Oh, this one, yeah, sorry.
No, yeah, that one. Thank you. Retrospective. Okay, I'm going to be interested to hear what Sar has to say about this. Thank you.
I think these are the kind of facts that we need to go over, because we can't do a probabilistic argument until we know what the right facts are. We need to know which facts to put numbers onto. We can't just start.
How did he prepare a rebuttal presentation in advance? I'm not sure now, because I thought at the end of the last video, didn't they say, can we take a 10-minute break? But now it seems like maybe they actually had a weekend to go over the other things or respond. Does anybody know for sure?
Likely to notice.
But I'd like to know.
I have it in front of me. Yes. So market. Yeah. So it's 0.5 for 0.5 for market on the low.
I see. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that. Sorry, excellent. We'll take another 7-minute break and then begin the rebuttals.
Maybe 10?
10-minute
That's right.
break. Yeah. No, so they had to have prepared this in advance, right? So
The numbers. And I think when it started is actually really important, because you want to know where and when. Those were like the 2 key questions I started looking at when I was trying to figure this out. And there's a lot of little things like the December 8th case that you missed, but then 2 slides later you're talking about Mr. Chen on December 16th. That's the same guy, but you didn't notice that you've double labeled the same case. As far as I could tell, that might have just been misspeaking.
yeah, it looked like even when I was looking at the guy's slides, it looked like he hadn't prepared the data himself, because he was misstating even what was on some of the slides, or it didn't seem like he understood what he was showing sometimes.
You talked about this Texas sharpshooter fallacy, and I think this is actually a great metaphor, but I think this also applies to the mahjong room, to the toilets theory, to a lot of these things, to this Weibo data, where you describe this as unbiased, and I think there's a bias you're missing, which is that you got to have like 20 different ways you can mount the data in Wuhan, and most of them are going to say north side of the river, but you're going to find one that says south side of the river. And the people who are doing motivated reasoning are going to latch onto the one that says south side. That's where the bias comes in. When you actually look at that data, it's from February. It's people putting the dates in retrospectively. 3 entered December. That's kind of weird. That could just be old people fat fingering the date. We don't know which of these 3 points are from December. You know, it could be the 3 points right there. I tried to find a copy of that data. I couldn't even find December points in it. I only found January.
This is something that's not talked about much, but the mistakes in data entry are actually a thing that people that do broad stats have to account for. There was a really interesting way that this showed up in the 2016 election, I think, where there was this quote unquote study that claimed that there was widespread voter fraud because like 3 million illegals voted. And there was this, I don't remember if Cambridge or Harvard or somebody did a response to this. Somebody maybe can find it. But there was an interesting statistics thing. I don't know what I think there's a formal name for this fallacy basically. But basically what happens is let's say that you survey 2 groups of people. They surveyed legal immigrants and then people who might be illegal immigrants, or citizens or people here illegally, right? Now, when you survey these 2 groups of people, you run into a strange issue where there is a huge group in the first category, and there's probably a very, very small group in the second category. I'll say 1,000 even. And then you survey and you ask them, did you vote in the last election? Okay. Now, one thing that happens when you do surveys is you have to account for some kind of error when people fill out a thing. They might check the wrong box. They would just don't read the question right. It's just stupid or whatever, right? I don't know what standard surveyors account for, if it's 1% or 2% of responses or some percentage of responses. But something that happens here is if you have these 1 million people who are citizens, if they make a mistake, we'll say a small percentage of them, we'll say 0.1% of these people accidentally mark on the thing that they're undocumented or that they're not a citizen, and then they go on to say that they did vote, because the size of these 2 groups is so disproportionate, a very small identification error here it will double the size of this population over here when you go to do this survey. So of these 1 million people who are all citizens, maybe 0.1% fuck up the form, or they mismark something. They say, oh, I'm not a citizen or whatever. They fuck it up and they say, yeah, I did go on to vote. Well, that 0.1% of people who made that mistake are the size of your entire cohort over here. And then on this side, well, let's say 0.1% of them fuck up their data entry. That's literally just one person who misidentifies themselves as a citizen. There was an early study in 2017, I think, that said that 3 million illegal citizens voted, or I'm sorry, not citizens, 3 million illegal immigrants voted. That's what this study did. Was it did it by survey, and then I believe it was. I think it might have been Harvard that did the response saying this is the statistical error that this survey didn't account for, and is most likely the explanation for how 50% of illegal immigrants said that they voted in a federal election on a survey that was given out. Is much more likely that this is what happened. Oh shit, was it Harvard? We are professional political scientists who are to clarify the evidence in our field for President Trump's claim, which he's repeated several times, that millions of non-citizens voted in the 2016 presidential election. The president has cited a 2014 article by Jesse Richman, Gulshan Chattah, and David Ernest, published in their peer-reviewed journal Electoral Studies as evidence for this claim. In that study, Richman and his colleagues used data from the 2008-2010 iterations of the Cooperative Congressional Election Study, a large-scale regular survey that contained more than 30,000 and 55,000 respondents, respectively. The researchers leveraged questions about respondent citizenship status and voting to argue that between 7.9% and 14.7% of non-citizens voted in 2008. Given the non-citizen population of about 19.4 million, the authors concluded the number of non-citizen voters could range from just over 38,000 at the very minimum to nearly 2.8 million at the maximum. The higher bound in this statement is the one that appears to have shaped the president's rhetoric on this issue. Funnily enough, I think you could probably consider this to be part of a sharpshooter fallacy. For instance, if you want to study something incredibly specific about a certain cohort, you would probably be very careful about how you poll around that particular question. Whereas if you just have a broad set of data that you collect about a cohort and somebody wants to come in and ask very specific questions, well, depending on the question, you might be able to torture or pull out whatever you want from that study, because that's not even what that survey was initially even trying to ask. So for instance, if we were actually surveying people to figure out who voted and who didn't vote in an election, who was an undocumented citizen, an undocumented person versus like an actual citizen, you would probably either identify via like Social Security or something, or you would ask more specific questions or more questions about it in order to audit your data set to make sure that you don't have any of these errors. But my guess is in these initial surveys, the cooperative congressional election study, they probably weren't hyper-fixated on that particular question, so they probably didn't hyper-fixate on validating the data in that sense. So pulling this information from the survey is probably not an appropriate thing to do. The analysis in this paper has been shown to be incorrect. In a survey as large as the CCES, even a small rate of response error, where people incorrectly mark the wrong item on a survey, can lead to incorrect conclusions. Importantly, the findings in Richmond et al. Rest on a sample of only 339 respondents who claimed to be non-citizens in 2008 out of about 30,000 CCES respondents. Stephen Ancelobia here, Samantha Lux, and Brian Schaffner demonstrated in a 2015 paper that response error explains nearly all of the supposed non-citizens in Richmond et al. Sample who voted. The underlying intuition is relatively straightforward. Given the dynamics of the CCES, a very large overall sample with a very small subpopulation of non-citizens, even with a very low error rate of 0.1%, we would expect roughly 10% of the people in the non-citizen category would actually be citizens. If those people then voted at a higher rate, it would appear as if a low but consequential percentage of non-citizens were voting, which is precisely the result Richmond et al. Describe. Indeed, Anspalola and colleagues will leverage a key feature of the CCES to investigate this possibility. When they examined the responses from people who were asked the citizenship question at 2 different points in time, they found inconsistencies. Oh, so the survey actually did check for that. These people just didn't incorporate it into their, into their study. The citizenship status of 56 respondents changed in 2 years, and 20 people reported moving from citizen to non-citizen status, which is not even a plausible change. Of those, who we can be more confident are non-citizens, there was not a single voter in 2010. In 2012, there was just one person who may have voted, but even in that case, the evidence suggested the respondent was actually not a voter. Thus, we believe that the findings in Richmond et al. Are driven by measurement error in the CCES and do not accurately reflect the rates of non-citizen voting in the United States. Nobody talks about this anymore, but Trump put together some like election or illegal immigrant voting commission in Congress to try to figure out if illegals were voting, because he kept claiming 3 million illegals voted over and over again, and that source came from this bullshit study. And also the board that he put together found fuck all. They didn't find anything to prove that his claim anyway. So, but that's that was that data anomaly there.
Points. The Weibo data in general, I totally agree with your point that this matches the population density of the city. This is Weibo, this is density, I think it's elderly density. But that's not true for the early cases. You can match these contours of the early cases, and they don't match the density. This is the clearest way I found to show it, which is you just draw the points on it. And, that probably explains the stuff here. I don't think it explains the cluster there. I think there's still a meaningful pattern there. So I guess I'll stop there. I don't want to talk the whole time. I want to understand why you think the case search is biased.
Hold on, I just got food. Oh my God, I want to hear this guy talk through this so much. Oh man. Okay. Being able to explain general fallacies is good, like knowing what an ad hominem fallacy is or whatever. It's good to be able to explain that, but it is essential to be able to articulate why you feel a particular thing exemplifies that fallacy. You have to be able to articulate it with particularity. Otherwise, you're just you're paying lip service to it, right? So if I say an ad hominem fallacy is when you dismiss an argument that I've made by personally insulting me or attacking my character instead, right? If somebody comes up to me, they're like, oh, Destiny believes that Israelis on average are 9 feet tall and have 12-inch monster cocks, but the only reason he believes that is because he's a fucking loser. Well, that would be an ad hominem attack. And that's an ad hominem attack because you're dismissing my claim by calling me a fucking loser. You haven't attacked the argument at all. Whereas, let's say that somebody says, Destiny believes that Israelis are 9 feet tall and have 12-inch cocks, and he's only saying that because he saw a post on Twitter and he hasn't provided any evidence for that whatsoever. He's a fucking idiot. And then I go, oh, well, that's an ad hominem. And they're like, what do you mean by this? And I'm just like, well, you attacked my character. That's not an ad hominem fallacy. He addressed my arguments, and he also insulted me. Insulting somebody is not an ad hominem. Ad hominem is when you refute an argument by insulting the person. You can refute the argument and then insult the person, and you haven't engaged in any fallacious reasoning, right? So being able to articulate why a particular thing exemplified or demonstrated a fallacy that you're talking about is essential. You have to do that. Otherwise, there's no point in you being able to recognize fallacies. Okay, will he be able to defend his claim? This guy claimed on the bottom that all of the data that shows the origination of the SARS-CoV-2 virus as being in the wet markets or whatever, he says all of that was biased in the selection. So let's see if you can defend that.
I'll stop there. I don't want to talk the whole time. I want to understand why you think the case search is biased. What are your
He has to be able to say something other than selection biased because they wanted the results. I don't know if he'll be able to.
best arguments there are?
Wait, what is biased?
Why the early case searches? You think it just looks like it's centered on the market, but it's not actually.
Right. So it's important to I need to change the clock. Right? Or when he's asking this time, I don't know.
I thought Peter was still asking you as part of, and so he.
So if he's asking us this time, okay.
That's
I don't remember the rules. Okay, so.
Or I can just talk for 30 minutes, but I think it'd be a better discussion to here's a disagreement. Why do you think it's biased when I think it's unbiased?
Okay, so it's important to understand, when we say biased, we're not saying that the market is just a random place. Okay, we're definitely accepting that it is a.
Wait, sorry, is this counting against my time while he answers?
I don't know, what are the rules?
So in the rules it says, if you ask as I understood it, Peter, if you ask a question of SAR, the time counts against you because you have the floor. You can yield the floor and have him start his rebuttal and answer that question. I would be obviously totally.
Well, so there's two incentives here. One is
because his incentive is to run down the clock then by not answering meaningfully, right?
I could just give 30 rebuttals and that's going to be a crappy debate. Or I can say, here's a point, I'd like you to respond to this and yield. And I guess he could switch to a completely different point if he wants. But I don't want to lose all my time just based on he's answering questions when I'm trying to have a discussion. So I think we need to resolve that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fine with switching the time if that's okay with you, Sar.
I'm going to do one of two things here. I'm either just going to say a bunch of complaints or I'm going to yield. But I'm not going to give him my time while he answers his questions.
That's fair, obviously.
Or answers my questions.
Totally understand.
I mean, if the idea is that I answer a specific question, then
or
I don't
yield. Let's go with that. It'll be a good discussion. I yield my time. Here's what I'd like you to talk about, but obviously you can talk about anything.
Okay. So I will answer maybe in a different order. So first of all, the most important thing is about the billion versus 100,000 probabilities. Yes, many people do probabilistic models and get very extreme numbers. Okay. In the case of the murder we analyzed, we had some law professor.
He can't answer the question. This is not relevant. He's just completely and utterly unprepared for this conversation. Supposedly is it Denmark or the Netherlands? What's the place where they're like, this guy got a speeding ticket for $500,000 because he's rich? The only thing that's on the line for the bottom guys is ego, I guess, because $100,000 isn't a lot of money to a guy whose net worth is over $200 million. And I think that shows. He should have had to give odds or something on this. Or maybe he really does think he's making good. I don't know. He's going back to, he's not even addressing, I don't understand what's happening. It can't be this hard. The root of the top guy's question is, how the fuck do you determine what numbers you use as your starting estimates for your probability guesses? That's what he's asking, with specificity to this case. And this guy's about to go yap for 10 minutes on the Israeli murder case and then the Ghouta chemical weapons case. But it's not relevant. It doesn't matter. He's asking a very specific question about this specific case. He doesn't want a broad, general notion towards, some numbers can be subjective.
Who did an analysis and showed that it's 1 in 200 million probability that the person in jail is not the murderer, right? He by the way, today he agrees he was wrong. So Doing bad probabilistic calculation is very easy. What we do is we go through a very careful methodology where
What is the methodology? That's what he's
go-
asking. He's saying, what is the methodology?
we steelman each hypothesis, find the best explanation.
Oh my God.
Look for dependencies, look for the best numbers, give a low range and a high range, and integrate all the numbers to something that is robust. So it's worth to understand. We're not saying it's a 1 to 100,000 probability. The result we have was, I don't remember, it's 99%. That's 1 in 100. The 1 in 100,000 is how much you need to shift the data in order to pass 50%. Because remember, we do have all these safety measures, right? So as you, it's not enough, if 99% doesn't mean 1 in 100, and if you give 1 in 100, it's, you win. You need to go over all the safety measures, and that's 1 in 100,000. Okay, so that's in general about the probabilities. Yeah, we're perfectly fine in getting some facts wrong. We corrected some numbers based on your analysis, and it's perfectly fine that we will correct more numbers and eventually concede that zoonosis is most likely. We don't have a problem with this method. Just point out any mistakes you see, and we will correct. At this point, the amount of evidence is so strong, I can't see that happening, but sure, let's do that. About specific things you said about Shen, if you go back to the recording, I said specifically that some say 8, some say 16. This is not settled. 16 is not settled. It's based on an interview that is not clear who they're talking about.
Like, he's just blurting random things. When he says 8 or 16, is he talking about the date of the first infection? Because the date of the first infection can be dispositive. Like, it can absolutely prove one thing correct or not. Like, if the very first infection was from, a date way after or way before somebody else's stated date or timeline, you could destroy a timeline completely. Remember, one of the things I said when you're debating history with people, and it's true of a lot of things, is the timelines are very important. People who mix up or fuck up timelines, especially when causality is involved, right? Like, if I say something, like the thing that made Americans or Nazis, I guess, like really hate Jews was in 1956, it was the Suez Crisis or whatever. Like, if I were to say something like that, it doesn't, like, an idiot, and 90% of you retards will be like, oh my God, you got the date wrong. But the thing that is questionable there isn't that you got the date wrong. It would be, there's a lot of causality that, how does it, 1956, but there's stuff that happened way before that was arguably more important for why Nazis hated Jews. Nazi Party didn't even exist in 56. Like, there's a lot of other stuff that's getting fucked up here in terms of your timeline for you to make that kind of a mistake. It doesn't make sense to make that kind of mistake, or it shows a serious lack of understanding of the whole thing. So to just say like, first infection could have been on the 18th, it could have been on the 6th, could have, whatever. It's like, well, these are really, really, really important facts because they could be dispositive, meaning that if you're right on this particular thing, it's over. That's all you need, right? I think you could say that if I have like a video recording of somebody saying, I'm murdering you, and he stabs somebody like 10 times, that would be dispositive. It's like, that's it. That's all we need. You're dead. You're 100% dead to rights on this. I don't care what other evidence you have. I don't care what else you say. I don't care whatever probabilistic, inductive bullshit or circumstantial whatever. I literally have a video of you admitting it and doing it. Like, that's it. So it's interesting for him to kind of just brush over that.
Translated, we're fine saying it's 16. It's not an issue. But notice that when I said 16, I mentioned that some say it's 8. I did not neglect that.
Sorry, I must have missed that.
Okay. About Mahjong being a sharpshooter, no, Mahjong starts from lots of testimonies of people saying Mahjong. It starts from the evidence. It didn't start from looking for what could match. Okay, it started from the evidence of many people saying the first cases were Mahjong players. I agree about what you said about the south side and the north side or east or west side in Weibo. The data we brought about WIV being in the center, we explicitly said this is not something we believe in. This is just showing you how easy it is to cherry pick data. We're agreeing with you. That's sharpshooter fallacy to claim that Weibo supports WIV. The idea was to show how much you can play with the data and how unreliable these things are. the thing about Weibo being later cases, sure. However, just want to remember that the whole idea of the market analysis is that cases do spread geographically, right? So
Jesus Christ, I'm sorry, I'm so triggered by the way that this guy presents this. Also, and maybe tech bros will learn this because I guess of how LLMs and everything work. Am I correct in saying like an LLM is only as good as the underlying data sets that it's trained on, right? Whatever analysis method that you're using is only going to be good on your underlying data sets. You can't take a bunch of dog shit data and then put it into one database and then magically have good data. That's not how that works. You can't do that. Like you're creating synthetic CDOs or whatever, you know, in the 2008 crisis. Whatever. You can't just take a bunch of dog shit and throw it together and it becomes magically good data. One of the biggest criticisms, one of the most difficult things, one of the best things about doing like a meta-analysis is the synthetic larger data sets you're creating from underlying data sets. The underlying data has to be good. You can't just fabricate a good conclusion out of a bunch of unreliable, low verification bullshit data. You can't do that. So for him being so blasé about his underlying assumptions and then saying, well, you know, we threw them all together and we calculated our probabilities is stupid. It doesn't make any sense.
We accept that cases spread geographically and gradually, or we don't. So if the Weibo data centers on the population center, then that's evidence against it being the market. So we need to decide whether the centering works or not. And it's very important to understand about the bias. We are not claiming the market is a random place. We're saying it's a significant superspread allocation due to its features. Okay, and it's definitely
What does that word mean?
a place where a significant number of cases were. Probably not 33% as claimed because there is the biases of market being noticed by people, by health worker, because it's been a criteria, because contact tracing, everything. There are a lot of things that will age, a lot of things that make the market more likely to be noticed. But we're not saying it's not important. We're saying it's one of the main superspread allocations, and we're even saying this is the
Blasé. Isn't blasé? You're kind of like indifferent, like too cool. You know, you're like somebody shows up with a gun in a podcast, and you're like, huh, and what about it, bro? You're like, I have a very blasé attitude towards this. Is that not what that means? Blasé. Unimpressed or indifferent to something because one has experienced or seen it so often before.
Blasé.
the first big cluster. We're fine with that. Just say that there were
like he keeps saying over and over again, like, yeah, we might be significantly off on a lot of our assumptions here. Like,
I'm not saying it's not important. We're saying it's one of the main superspread allocations, and we're even saying this is the first big cluster. We're fine with that. Just say that there were many other cases spread around the city that didn't mature into a super spreader event. That's all. I yield.
I mean, how many other cases would you estimate there were? So let's say December 13th, you've got these 5 hospitalized cases at the market that I pointed out. 4 workers, one's a repeat visitor. And so you have more cases than that probably because those are hospitalized. But how many cases do you think are in Wuhan on that date? I yield.
I don't have
No
a
idea.
estimate, but probably mid-December. I don't know. It's probably 10-20% of the cases are in the market.
that was
Less.
what?
I need to think if you need an exact.
I do need an exact number because that clarifies how high it is.
Yeah, like this guy came. This guy came up top for like a fucking a thesis defense. Okay, this guy's like, this is what my PhD is on, and now I'm going to defend my thesis or whatever, and this is what we're doing. And the bottom guy shut up to like a Twitter argument. And he's like, what? He's doing the lazy Gardner shit. You said that earlier, I even think, right? I don't want to get into the weeds on this. So I don't want to get too specific. Excuse me, this is a $100,000 15-hour debate. What do you mean you don't want to get specific? That's why you're here. You guys literally both have multiple PowerPoints made for this debate. How can you not get into the specifics? What? This slide is the whole reason he lost.
We don't.
Oh, yeah, base.
What exactly do you need?
So this is
Estimate?
December 13th. So there's these 5
December
hospitalized
13th.
cases at the market, and you think there's lots of COVID elsewhere in Wuhan.
So
How many-
there's five hospitalizations.
Yeah, let's say
You
hospitalization
want to know how many cases overall in the world at that time?
in Wuhan.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Yeah. Okay, I will try to get that. Okay.
How can that be the same thing?
Udo,
What?
Can you answer that on the spot?
No.
No.
Even order
Research.
He's Google. He's just a reader. You know what he's doing right now? He's Googling population in Wuhan and he's multiplying it by some fucking retarded number. That's exactly what he's doing. Population in Wuhan 2020, and then he's multiplying it by some fucking random number. That's exactly what he's doing right now. I hope he asks him what calculation he's doing. Please explain it. That's exactly what he's doing.
No, can you answer that on the spot? Even order of
research. I can
even
do
order of
this.
magnitude. Do you? I mean, do you?
Order
So,
of magnitude, I would say 5 to 10 times more.
so 5 to
50.
10 times 5. So it's 25 to 50 cases, or 25 to 50 hospitalizations.
So no, so remember that the market is older population. So if you want it in cases, yeah, probably 50 to 100. I don't know.
Right. So
It's not something I can do.
if there's 100 cases and the hospitalization rate of COVID is 5%, then you've already proved it's the market. Because
this
why
is
would
this is in
why-
addition to the market. So
why
I
would
would say,
5%?
if you want, I'd say 5 hospitalizations in addition to the 5 in the market. But really, you're trying to get something that I'm not claiming to have the entire model of the outbreak in my head. What we do is we look carefully in data and do probabilistic analysis and collect information and correct when there are mistakes. There's no use trying to push me to
You're
give
thinking
numbers.
you're thinking it's double? Is that what you said? There's 5 hospitalizations in the market and 5 outside the market?
It's just a guess. I can.
Or do you think it's
I'll give
like
you
10
the next session? I can give you numbers in session 3. I can't give you something off my head now. It's not.
I can't do. He does. He has no. He can't. He can't do anything. This is dynamic understanding versus static. It's not, or macro versus discrete. Like the top guy has a command of the subject material, right? Conceptually, he understands it, and discreetly, he knows like facts and figures and numbers. Bottom guy, I'm not even fully convinced that he prepared his own slides. I don't think he did. I think somebody else prepared the slides for him and maybe had him do one demo presentation. He can't answer any questions at all about any of his presentation.
Thinking it's double? Is that what you said? There's 5 hospitalizations in the market and 5 outside the market?
It's just a guess. I can.
Or do you think it's
I'll
like
give you
10?
the next session? I can give you numbers in session 3. I can't give you something off my head now. It's not how we work. It's not about.
Okay.
It's not about us being smart. It's about the methodology.
Let me just explain why this matters.
Like, it's about methodology? No, motherfucker. It's about methodology of how you collect your data. That's the starting point. If you work in scientific research at all, and anybody that's ever worked in a lab or anything knows this, is everything starts at the data collection point. If that's fucked, everything you do is fucked. Literally nothing matters past that point. If the people working in your labs are lazy, are throwing out shit that doesn't matter, if the equipment isn't fucking, functioning correctly, whatever, then nothing matters. No science can be done past that point. Data collection is like the beginning and the start of everything that comes past it. And I don't know if you would call it fucking chaos theory or whatever the fuck else, but if you fuck up your initial data, the possible error rates and everything past that initial collection are going to be so wide, are so fucked. There's no possible way that you could speak about statistically significant results that you're going to reject any null. You're just fucked. You're fucked. I don't even know why I have to say this. It's so obviously true. This is so fucking obvious. Like you can't. How can your foundation, especially when you claim to be doing Bayesian analysis and probabilistic estimation, then your initial numbers are very important. The system will be very sensitive to your starting numbers here.
It's not about.
Okay.
It's not about us being smart. It's about the methodology.
Let me just explain why this matters. So here's a model. We know how fast COVID doubles, the epidemic doubles. It's about 3.5 days. So that's 2 doublings per week. So let's say, let's guess it's 50 cases at the market, or 50 cases total on that date. Hospitalizations, it's 2 to 3. And then you can apply these doublings forwards and backwards. So you can figure out when it started, November 15th, roughly.
Oh, so remember when I said that other guy would list numbers and you'd have no fucking idea what those numbers meant or whatever? This is listing numbers and understanding where they come from, right? So if we have an R0 of the given R0 of the starting SARS-CoV-2 infection, then we can calculate from that the rates of doubling. Then we can do an estimate retrospectively, which is one of the slides that he showed before. Like if we started to see, 100 or whatever hospitalizations show up here, we can estimate when patient 0 was by retroactively going back and applying our formula, right? And we can also look at the projections going forward. Did the infectious rates match match the projected numbers before any lockdowns? They probably did. I'm guessing they did. So this is an example of having numbers, but having an actual calculation and be able to explain where that calculation came from and then being able to justify it. Yeah, Jesus.
November 22nd, maybe. So it lines up with PCAR's model pretty well. And you can apply it forwards to when the Wuhan lockdown started. And these numbers, they're correct to about a factor of 2. Now, you can also do this.
When he says correct to a factor of 2, does that mean that if you multiply it or divide it by 2, so it's within 50% to 150% of the measured, or what is, when you say factor of 2 there, what does that mean? So if the predicted death rate is 2,000, does that mean that the actual death rate was within 1,000 to 4,000? Or what does that mean when you say factor of 2 there? Oh, wait. The correct number, I'm sorry, it says right here. The correct number for January 24th are maybe 10,000 hospitalizations and 1,000 to 2,000 pending deaths. That's not bad. So we're within a factor of 2 reality. Okay, so divided by, okay.
And so here's cases and the lockdown, and you can cut this. It's like an exponential curve until it hits 123, and then you can fit an exponential curve to that data, and it's r squared 0.999. It's a great model.
Oh, see, like this guy it isn't just like doing random shit, right? Like he has models, he can explain the empirical data, what were the actual infections, and then what is the predicted data given, some formula, right? This is what you do in all science probably, right? But like in economics and stuff, right? You try to create a model that you feel like accurately explains something, and then you try to retrofit that model. You look at old data sets and you say, okay, well, using this formula, if I go back and I do this calculation, oh, see, look, it fits that data. And then hopefully it'll, in the future, can predict some events or data as well, right? Like these are how formulas are done, I would imagine, academically.
Exponential curve until it hits 123, and then you can fit an exponential curve to that data, and it's r squared 0.999. It's a great model, and then it slows down when the lockdown happens. Now try 1,000 cases on that day. You project it forwards, and you get 10 times as many deaths as actually happened in Wuhan.
And this is a really good argument for. It's an argument for when the first case probably started, because if the argument was, well, the first cases were probably in, this is why for a lot of people arguing, well, what about for lab leak? What if it was just somebody being careless or something that wasn't, it wasn't necessarily a government fuck up or something else happened and, it leaked, through some less nefarious means? Sure, that could have happened, I guess. Like I can grant that that's a possibility. However, we know how this virus functions. We know the infectivity. It doesn't make sense to say that, well, it could have leaked out like in August, and then maybe now it's showing up. It's like, no, we know the growth rate of the virus, and he's demonstrating this now, right? That if we go back and we say, well, there were already 1,000 cases at this point in time, you can project from there how many cases you think there would have been, and these numbers don't match, right?
So it can't be 10 times as many. The market.
I don't even know if this bottom guy is comprehending this argument, though. I don't even know how much. I don't even know stats. I truly don't. I know a couple terms that I get wrong about 50% of the time. So I don't even know if I would call this stats yet. I don't know if the guy can even follow the basic logic here of computing these numbers. We'll see what his response is.
Actually happened in Wuhan. So it can't be 10 times as many. The market needs to be like all the cases or a substantial fraction of the cases. And if you went even more crazy, like 10,000 cases on December 13th, you're going to end up with 400,000 deaths in Wuhan by the time the lockdowns. And this is bigger than any death total of anywhere in the world. And even this one, I think, once all lockdowns are done, it's going to be worse death total than any city that hit the world. And you'd say that got hit by COVID. So this is actually a case where human reasoning fails. People don't understand exponential math intuitively. They think, oh, September origin, November origin, doesn't really matter. It's just going to sputter along. But every time COVID gets somewhere.
And it's funny because he's bringing up now some of the fallacious or some of the fallacies that you might fall into if you don't rigorously analyze your methodology, like how you or your approach to solving a problem. And this guy just gave a perfect explanation of it, right? It might seem intuitively like you'd say, well, maybe the first case was in October, maybe the first case was in August, who knows? This is off by a month. Does that matter that much? Well, when you're talking about an insanely infectious virus, it does kind of matter because it would be significantly different, right? Imagine if you went to a house and imagine, in 1 or 2 days, you start to smell something really fucking bad, and then you call the cops, and they go into the closet, they break a wall open or whatever, and there's like a dead body there, and you're like, holy shit. Imagine somebody tries to argue, I think that person was actually put there by the last tenant, right? And you're an investigator, and you're like, okay, well, when did the last tenant move in? And it was like, the last tenant either moved in, I think it was the 29th of last month, like 2 days ago, or it might have been 2 months earlier, I don't remember. Those two things are significantly different. Right? If a dead body was stored in a wall for 2 days, I'm guessing, I don't know what the decay rate is on a dead body, but like that to me intuitively sounds believable that, okay, well, maybe it'll start to smell really bad in 3 or 4 days, right? But a month or 2 months ago, based on what I've heard about dead bodies, that would be an unbearable stench. There's no shot that it could be there for months. So to just now this more intuitively when it comes to like decay or rotting things, intuitively that if somebody were to mix up those starting dates, you would be highly sus of that person. How could you mix that up? Was it 3 days or 3 months ago? There's no way you can make that mistake. One of these numbers would result in a much clearly different reality. But it's the same way here with the infection as well. If somebody was infected with an insanely infectious disease that we've never seen before, that we know, and we know how fast and quickly it spreads to everybody, and nobody's taking lockdown measures because nobody even knows it exists, how is this virus not infecting anybody for 2 months and then all of a sudden it explodes like it just had its first actual release in the Wuhan wet markets? It doesn't make any sense, right? This is making sense how I'm going to explain this, right? The math doesn't math here. The common sense doesn't common sense here. This can't possibly be the case without some external factor that we would have to introduce. Like maybe there was a patient 0 and then the government locked that person up secretly without anybody knowing it. And then a month later, one of the government workers got infected, maybe something like that. That you would have to have some massive external modifier or external thing that's changing your data here to make this make sense.
Doesn't really matter. It's just going to sputter along. But every time COVID gets somewhere, it either goes extinct right away or blows up exponentially. And a difference of a month is a factor of 256 in cases. 2 months is 65,000. And if your model can't distinguish between like October and November, you're ignoring
Worthless.
a huge fraction of the data. Your model doesn't explain that very well. And so we can bound how biased either, if we go back to the one that works, where let's say it's 50 cases, 2 to 3, maybe it's really 100 cases in 5 or the market, something like that. And maybe it's more hospitalizations because they're older, that would work. Then it's like every case is at the market. So you can still have a lab origin, because you've had 50 cases by then, and case number 1 could have come from the lab, and he just went straight to the market. That's possible, but it is highly improbable. And you can't have the scenario where it's just all over Wuhan, because it doesn't fit with the math. And I mean, I'm not just making up these doubling numbers. I've looked these up over multiple sources.
Oh, and he's even giving a source for the R, not the doubling. Like, this guy is just, Jesus, he's got it.
I've checked them by fitting the data in Excel myself. Yeah, I yield.
I'm going to interrupt before Sar
Okay.
has a chance to speak. One of your slides, I think you were showing real data. Can you clarify if that was cases or detected cases? And if so, like how big of a disparity? This slide.
This is detected cases, which are mostly hospitalizations, honestly, at that point.
Okay, do you have any notion of roughly how big a disparity is between detected cases and actual cases?
It's on order of magnitude of the hospitalization rate.
Okay, so you think the real numbers are 20 times what's in this plot?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, thank you. That's all I wanted to
20,
ask. And see what Sarah has to say.
Sure. So again, it's
Good luck.
to understand our position. We're not saying that the market is not important. We're not saying that the infection there is like the general population in Wuhan. We're not saying it's all over Wuhan, lots of
He
infections.
can't. He has no idea. He's totally and utterly lost here. I can't believe he agreed to do this debate. I hate my life. I can't believe this.
That's not what we're saying. We're saying that the evidence shows that even though the market was an early super spreading event, it was not due to an animal. Look at the whole analysis I walked through.
You can't even. That's not even what this guy's asking. This is where I would say, oh, this guy's got the headline. The judges should step in and say, sir, you're not responding to the question at all.
And the end of my my part was about showing that the evidence doesn't match the hypothesis in a way that would support an animal being the one bringing it to the market. So it's wanted to attack what actually we're saying, not something that other people are saying. So
Oh my God, he's so lost.
we're definitely willing to accept that the market is a major event. Now, a lot of the data you showed is data.
I'm sorry. What other bets does this guy have open on his website for $100,000 debates?
Seeing for the first time, so it's hard for me to respond. So I'll look at it.
Because you didn't fact check. Like, these are basic things you should know from the exponential math in Wuhan. You should know the case.
You should. Yeah, you should. Unfortunately, I'm sorry. There's no excuse not to know this. And if I was this guy, well, if I was him, I would cuck out because I'm too nice in these debates. But this is $100,000 on the line. He should lean in very, very, very hard to this. Your data initial conditions your whole model is going to be very sensitive. Your posterior or a posteriori, okay, your pasta argument, okay, is going to be very sensitive to some of these a priori assumptions you're making or some of these initial conditions. It's going to be very sensitive to this. You can't just plug in whatever and then say like this guy said for almost every number he brought up, I was like, well, it could be way different. Well, we acknowledge it could be way different. 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 Like, if everything could be way different, then what the fuck is the predictivity of your model? How are you predicting any outcome whatsoever if everything could be so fucking different?
Numbers and the death numbers, if you're trying to understand how it started.
He's mad.
Sorry, I shouldn't be so aggressive.
No, you should be. You should be. It's $100,000 on the line. And he doesn't know anything about this. He didn't come into this prepared at all.
How about the mahjong room a little bit?
This is my time now.
Oh, right.
Okay. Yes. So Yeah, so it's important to understand what we're claiming about the market. So a lot of the data I haven't seen. It's new to me. We need to analyze it. It takes time, and maybe we'll find it convincing. I'm not saying anything, but at this point, I can't respond to a lot of it. First instinct about what you said about the exponentials being unintuitive. So I think what's missing there, I need to verify. I think what's missing there is you're forgetting what is the importance of a closed location with ideal conditions. By the way, your screen is
What?
still shared. I don't know if you care. So when you have a closed area with whatever, with the mahjong room, with the per ventilation, with the humidity, with the older population, when you have that closed area with repeat visitors coming to the same place every day, you will have a much higher exponent within that than in the rest of the city. Okay, so saying that,
Like, again, this is a professional debate. You are not a subject matter expert. Even if you were a subject matter expert, you should be able to justify that claim. You're telling me the spread of this would be greater in this place versus not. Prove it. Show me that. I don't even intuitively believe that's true. I do not intuitively believe that a virus would spread easier just because it's in a place like that. Because it could be the fact that while the virus might spread easier initially there, the people that visit that place are more likely to go to high density areas where it will spread even more easier there just because of the amount of people that travel there. I wouldn't take that as just an assumption. You should be able to justify that number. He justified his numbers. He's had 2 different studies where he pulled that doubling from. What's your evidence here that it significantly spreads or it spreads significantly faster in some areas versus other areas or whatever? What even is this? This is literally... He's literally making all of the common errors and fallacies when somebody approaches him like this. Oh, I'm just going to rely on my intuition here. I'm just going to assume that everything is intuitive about this problem, and who cares about loser researchers or math nerds that try to figure any of this shit out, because we should be able to just kind of common sense it, right?
that if there are more cases outside the market, that would mean there would be 10 million dead or something like that is not a correct interpretation of exponentials. You need to take into account they're different. These are different exponentials inside the market and outside the market.
It's not... Like...
I yield.
Just to be clear, I did present an exponential model already. This is Picard's model from number of cases and hospitalizations. This doesn't go past much past January 1st, but so you.
I'd like to try to, I think, both ask a question and resolve the kind of contention over this point. So if I'm understanding correctly, and this I will ask both of you to respond to in this context, but it seems like both of you agree that the market is an early super spreader event or an early cluster event, whatever you want to call it. There is, if I'm understanding your position correctly, Sar, you're thinking that, or presenting evidence that that's due to some event. Could be mahjong, could be an individual person going to one of the mahjong halls, it could be something else. But regardless of how it happens, you agree that that's probable. Or you agree that that's the cluster event. You think it's much more probable that that's due to ultimately not an animal, but agreed there. Peter, you're claiming that it's the kind of difference in probabilities there, or the probability that you would see it emerge at the market if it wasn't via an animal is pretty low, or if there weren't. I think an additional part of your analysis is if there weren't a significant number of other circulating cases, which is why you're trying to press SAR on the question of where those other cases are. Is that a fair understanding of your position?
I'm saying that the simple exponential model explains that there can't be a lot of cases outside the market, and I'm not saying it rules out a lab leak, because if you do have 50 cases, patient zero could be at the market. But this is why I have the factor of 10,000 in my analysis, because it really just needs to go straight from the lab to the market without really spreading anywhere else. And that's such an unlikely coincidence. And you can come up with some other reason why it went to the market. It's not the animals, it's the mahjong room or whatever, and we can and should discuss those things. But I think you really bounded in which lab leak theories you can make. And you can really rule out that it's everywhere and it's only because they looked at the market theory.
Totally. It seems like it feels like that is not deeply in contention here. SAR's numbers, at least what he has said, seem within the realm of what I would presume the error is in many of these estimates, where we're asking about 1 or 2 cases. But it seems like you guys don't disagree a significant amount about those early cases. I understand the importance of them. I'm not making light of that. But it seems like, maybe let me pose this as a question. Your exponential model, obviously that's very, very I guess, sensitive to small changes in numbers. Do you think that the accuracy of the data that you have for the number of cases, when and where they are, allow you to make that there's not a very large error bar in the timing? Basically, do you think Picard at all is completely accurate, I guess?
Picard use a more sophisticated model to show the same thing. And I thought about this a lot, and that's why I came up with the 2 doublings a week, because it fits the data almost perfectly in terms of the actual model. And it's the kind of thing you can just wrap your head around. Whereas if I just show this graph of, here's what this scientist came up with, you can say, that scientist is motivated, he wants it to not be the lab. That's math, that's code, who can understand that? But anyone can multiply by 4. So, and you can use that to come up with pretty much the same answer. That's why I went with that, and I think it gets the point across best.
Okay, I'd ask a bunch, Eric.
And there's uncertainty in Picard's model too, I should say. In all these, because it doesn't go exponential right away, there is this possibility of stuttering transmission between it not going extinct and it going exponential. But that's it can't do that for long. So that's really where you get that, and the doubling time is, there's a tiny bit of uncertainty on that. So you mix all that, and you're not going to get down to the exact week, but you can definitely get down to the month. It's not September, and you can't be off by a factor of 10 in a number of cases and stuff like that. Maybe you're off by a factor of 2.
Do you want me to answer as well, or?
Totally, yeah.
So just to say words, I basically agree with your description. To be more accurate, we think there were a few more, maybe 1, 2, 3 more super spreader locations at the same time, but were not noticed due to that. However, our model, the market analysis that we did, does not require that. So I'm willing to just say the market was the first super spreader location, and it doesn't changes the numbers at all.
It doesn't change the numbers at all if the super spreading starts from the market. How could that not significantly alter the probability that it came from an animal versus it was a lab leak? I feel like if you grant that, you're granting 95% of the debate, right? That's the difference between somebody dies in America and you're trying to blame it on me because there's a dead body. And the guy's like, well, I don't know if the dead body was found anywhere across the entire United States or if the dead body was found in the hallway outside of your apartment. And it's you could grant either way. It's not, it's not proving either thing, regardless. It's not even going to change my estimate. It's not even going to change the probability that it happened because of me. And it's well, that seems like it would dramatically change the probability that it would happen. If the dead body was found in Washington State versus in the hallway outside your apartment, I don't know how you could grant that it could have started in the wet market and that doesn't affect your estimation at all.
So I'm fine just conceding that point. The market is the only location. But it's very important to understand about why this happens. So the market has certain conditions that make it much more likely to be an early super spreading location.
Now he should walk through that. Is a market more likely than, say, a shopping mall or some other? There are higher density places that are indoors that are probably more humid because the wet markets are outdoors, right? So there's probably indoor, more humidity, higher population density, more people walking past each other.
And that is because of the enclosed environment, ventilation, humidity, repeat.
Oh, is it? Are the wet markets enclosed? I thought the wet markets were an outdoor area. They might be enclosed. So what I just said would be great.
Population, elder population, all of that makes the exponent within that environment much higher than the rest of the city. And as we all know, the base of the exponent is a big change when you expand it over a few weeks.
Sorry, can I follow up on that last comment you're making? So to reconcile both of what both of you are saying into a single consistent story, I think what it looks like is, imagine there are 100 locations in Wuhan, one of which is this market, and the locations have different conditions, and the market has very conducive conditions for contagion and the others do not. The virus started somewhere outside of the market in the lab leak, and people at all or many of these locations were exposed incidentally to some amount of virus, and it only became a super spreading event.
Yeah, you cut off. Can you go back? Can you go back 10 seconds? Sorry.
Yes, sorry. So out of 100 locations, one amenable to transmission and 99 not. Many of these locations had people exposed, or maybe someone infected showed up one day or something like that. But at only one of them did this one infected person become a cluster of cases. It sounds like for the transmissibility in the market to be relevant, you have to have someone sick show up at the market, is what I'm saying.
Yes, of course, yes.
So are you imagining that the virus started from a lab leak and a small number of sick people between them visited many locations and one of them is this market?
Yeah,
And-
that's what I'm saying. So
Like, and this isn't a numbers thing, but this, I mean, we can broadly appeal anecdotally to the entire planet. This was not COVID, right? That COVID was a disease that exclusively spread in areas where it was highly favorable to COVID spreading. That's not the case at all. COVID spread fucking everywhere. That motherfucker traveled the whole fucking planet in less than a month from the first case. If the first case was December, well, maybe not from patient 0, but if the first measured case was December 8th, by January 1st, when did the WHO declare it a pandemic or an epidemic? Like this thing traveled so fast and so far. It got to every fucking place on the planet. What is this argument that super spreading events or a high rate of infections is only found in the most favorable conditions? I don't know. That's wild.
the lab worker has infected maybe a few close friends. They went to several locations across the town. They all infected more people. But the people in the market or in the mahjong room,
Like he's claiming the R naught of this virus is significantly different in most of society, and it was only inside the wet markets that it became highly infectious. Like what this? We know that this isn't true. This is such an absurd claim. On its face, it's an absurd claim.
they amplified much quicker than all the rest. Okay, so after 3 weeks, they grew 100x, and all the rest grew 10x. Okay, that's the point.
Yeah, that was all I had for that question. I have many other questions.
Like he should be forced to defend that. Like prove that. You need some underlying research. I would ask, like, can you defend that assertion? Do you have any research whatsoever that is supporting these wildly different transmissibilities between different areas or different rooms or different environments? I don't know why he would be allowed to just assert that. Even if he were a subject matter expert, he should be forced to show some research that backs that up. I don't think in a debate where it's $100,000 on the line, I wouldn't just let that baseless assertion stand.
I don't know if you want to move on to questions or if the two of you want to keep talking about these points.
I'd like to ask a few more, if that's okay.
You want to keep talking, please go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask, sorry, he's focusing on this mahjong room. Did you look up how many mahjong rooms there are in Wuhan?
We tried. We couldn't find good data, but in general, mahjong rooms are very popular all across China.
He doesn't even have an estimate. Seriously? You can't even give a bounded probability? You can't say anything? Bro, what are we even doing here? Hello?
It's a very popular pastime.
I found a paper on this, tried to get all the numbers. They found 838 chess and card
And he does have it! Oh, no!
rooms in the study area. And if you include other leisure entertainment, bars, theaters, cyber cafes, karaoke, they found almost 3,000 places. So what is special about this mahjong room when there's 3,000 of these places? And I can play a video of this also. The mahjong room is like a little closet in the market. It's tiny, it's not frequented by visitors. Do you want me to play a video?
Sure.
Yes.
This is Francisco.
Wait, what is this fucking browser this guy's using?
Twitter.
Oh, our favorite. Oh, never mind.
That's Peter Emberek. I think this is the mahjong room. I think this is this staircase that goes up to this
Nice.
little tiny closet where people hang out.
Jesus Christ.
Not 100% sure, but that's the closest I could find to a video. So, the traffic to that is visitors only. Outsiders aren't going to go to find that closet. And if you look at all these other leisure places, it's going to be, hugely more traffic to those. It's going to be even lower than the 1 in 10,000 that I gave you. Why is this one important? The important part is that it's for wet markets, and this is the one with the most wildlife shops. A yield.
All right. So first of all, again, this is new information. I need to look at it.
You didn't even try? You didn't look at any of it? If you don't know this at all, because this could significantly change your probability, right? What if there were only 2 of these mahjong rooms in the entire fucking city, right? Maybe a ton of people go to this particular one to play mahjong if it's so popular. Versus, what if there are like 100,000 of these mahjong rooms? Well, now the chances of them also being at a wet market seems to be like it would be significantly less, right? How would this not impact your probability so much?
In general, I think I need to look back at the data, but I think there were definitely. It was not small. There were several people there, visitors. It was not 5 people. This was dozens of people.
He doesn't even get.
But the point is, this was the combination of having a mahjong room plus a location where there's other reasons for amplification. Now, it's important to understand if we didn't have any other evidence about the market.
Oh my God, he's going to say this wouldn't impact it anyway, or he's going to say it doesn't matter anyway, or what?
I would say this is an interesting coincidence. Yeah, this is like a 1 in 20 coincidence. That's a big base factor. But the problem is, you have all the evidence. It doesn't support the market. You don't have the animals. You don't have the animal.
Whoa! We're just going through one thing at a time, buddy. Hold on. This is just one thing. Don't go to the other areas. Just one thing at a time.
You don't have the distribution. You don't have the RNA reads. Nothing supports that. So the model I did at the end looks both at the coincidence and both at the evidence. Okay, together.
None of that should even matter. Remember, the whole point of you doing this weird mathematical probabilistic, masturbatory exercise is that you don't have to use other assumptions, or you don't have to be biased in how you collect data. You should just be discreetly, dispassionately collecting evidence. Because now it sounds like he's being biased in his probability calculation. Why should it matter if the conditions are good or not? If it being in a mahjong room is just one factor that you have in your equation, that shouldn't matter at all. No.
They push the decision to be that an animal is not a reason. If we didn't have the evidence, if the evidence was neutral and not going against the market, then definitely that was a significant factor that would maybe move it 20x. That would be a significant coincidence, yes.
Do you yield?
Yeah, you were mute.
No, it was not.
Did you yield?
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Okay. So, did you know that they tested the mahjong table in the market and it tested negative?
Yeah, so I heard about that. I never seen anything reliable to confirm that, but we'd love to see.
That's in the 2023 paper. I put that in the links in my last presentation.
Okay, so again, I need to check. I remember asking people about that. They said that there was maybe something, but it's not reliable. If you have a source, I can now look at it.
Yeah, this is
I remember hearing something about that $100,000 debate, bro. What?
From the paper. I pulled out that source. So there are no positive samples from the mahjong room, but you keep describing it as like the hotspot in the market, but there's no positive samples there. And so this is a little late. This is tested on February 20th. So RNA degrades over time. You could say maybe it's degraded too much to test positive, but on February 15th, the drains are still testing positive for shop 629, and they're still testing positive for the other wildlife shop, and they're not testing positive anywhere else in the market at that time.
Yeah. I need to look at it. I mean, the idea is we're trying to do the debate in a way that the evidence is known beforehand, so everyone can prepare. I can't.
You didn't find any evidence? You didn't think to look for this evidence? These are the rebuttals, right?
I mean, it's public information.
What?
It's public information. But I'll share all of it.
Yeah, I know it's public, but the idea was to try to share the information before. I can look at it. I can only look at it and respond.
I don't know everything that's going to come up, and I only have 90 minutes, so I can't put 3
That's
hours.
fine. I'm not blaming. Just saying that you can't expect to get a response for something that I don't know.
So
I'm not an expert in that field. All I do is integrate the information into a probabilistic model.
I found one.
This guy's also a really great example of why context is important. You have to be able to contextualize numbers, understand what you're looking at, rather than thinking you can just be a little calculator and plug things in and come up with these sophisticated, robust answers for these incredibly complicated events.
Another picture of the so this is outside of the mahjong room. It's that window right there while they're disinfecting the market. And I actually found something interesting. There's a sign on the wall, and there's a character that got removed from the sign. So I translated that. It's this Dingsheng blank Wei wholesale store, and the missing character is probably Ye. It's Ye Wei. It's a wild taste. It's a term for eating wild animals. And they took down this character elsewhere in the market because they didn't want to admit that they were selling wild animals. So the mahjong room literally has the answer written on the outside of it. And when they go in the WHO report, we have another picture of it, and they've taken the sign down entirely at that point. I mean, I'm not 100% saying that proves anything, but I found that interesting. I think a lot of people more employed for this toilet theory. There's millions of bathrooms in Wuhan. Why is it the bathroom in the market that matters? It's the wild animals in the market. That's the unique thing.
I'd like to focus, unless, Sar, you want to respond to that, I'd like to ask a question.
No. Oh, wait, is he going to respond to it?
Quickly, I agree that it's an interesting coincidence and it would be significant unless all the evidence wouldn't support it.
But this is Texas sharpshooter fallacy, because this is a heat map. This is actually just over a smooth heat map. There's not actually positive samples there, but they found that if you make this heat map, hey, you can plug the mahjong room or the toilets right there and then say, hey, this is what caused the pandemic. But that's seeing a pattern because you want to see the pattern, because you want it to be a lab leak. You don't want it to be the animals. It's got to be something else. Therefore, it must be the toilets. But there's toilets everywhere.
Yeah, so far we're not claiming the toilets as the reason. We're claiming the mahjong hall is a better reason. Yeah, that's the. And again, it would have been an interesting coincidence if the market.
I can't talk about this specific data point, because my other data agrees with me more here, even though my guess is going to be as we go through all the other data, and all of that's going to rest on all the other data, you're literally doing a gish gallop, right? Where the goal is to stack 5 or 10 dog shit arguments on top of each other and then to hop between each one whenever you're pressed on any individual point.
If the evidence was not against the market.
Okay, I'd like to focus this question. Eric, do you have some, I don't want to cut you off because I've been talking a bunch, so you first pass, but otherwise I have a question about this.
If you have a question about this, go ahead. I got lots of questions, but not about this.
Okay, so then the thing I want to, this is, Peter, this is mainly, regarding the evidence. One of the things I've been struck by is how limited the environmental and animal sample sequencing data is, and how even in those places where it does come up positive, it's either very low, there's, in some of those samples, there's a couple of reads, or they've got a CT value that's like 35 in the qPCR, they've got things like that. And in general, you've got the 5 hedgehogs that have it in one freezer, and you've got different animals. This is just, I think, an intuitive reason why there is skepticism about the animal emergence, and why have we not found more things environmentally or generally in animals? Can you speak to that broadly, generally?
Yeah.
I don't like this question at all. I think that is a broad discussion on this subject. I think it's a great question. But in the context of this debate, that was not raised by him whatsoever. This sounds like a high quality question to interrogate the veracity of the data linking this to the wet market. Right? That sounds like a good question. Sure, you guys have some mRNA stuff. However, the quality of the testing is very low. The presence of this stuff isn't that high. Wouldn't we have expected to find more if it would have for sure originated from here? We haven't found the original strain at all yet, right? That's a very good question. That's a strong question. That's the strongest question that's been asked so far, challenging his position. But that wasn't brought up by this guy at all. I feel like that was a wildly inappropriate question. Again, considering it's a at-risk money debate, you're like throwing a lifeline to this debater on the bottom to ask that question. But
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of goalpost shifting here to begin with, in as much as the Chinese said there were no live animals at the market during the WHO report, so they were, lying about that. And then the lab leak supporters, they spent all of 2021 saying, show us there's a raccoon dog. We don't even know they were there, because we have Eddie Holmes' photo from 2014, and what does that prove? That's 5 years ago. And then as soon as we suddenly got this data, which China had been sitting on for 3 years, and it showed that they're not only in the market, but they're right there in that one shop, it was, that's not important because they're not positive, or we can't prove 100%, there's no correlation, or I kind of skimmed through this too fast in my presentation, but there were a bunch of different reasons they didn't like it. Alina Chan said that the human DNA had been removed from the samples, only leaving animal DNA, and that wasn't the case, and then they claimed that the sample was not positive, but it was NGS positive, but not PCR positive, so that was sort of splitting hairs, because it's low amount of data, low amount of reads, which you're correct about. So, and Sarah already mentioned this in his presentation. He said, even if a raccoon dog was infected, that doesn't prove that the market's the source. So you're going to get more goalpost shifting if somebody comes up with a really clever way to analyze this data to prove that it was somehow one of those infected animals. You can still shift the goalpost on the lab leak theory to say, but a person came into the lab
and infected the animal
in November and infected the market.
I understand that, but you're not debating all lab leaks. You're debating what's presented here. I think the thing that I'm trying to focus this on is I don't really care what Alina Chan says. I'm trying to understand why they're, given that an animal under the zoonotic theory produced this infection, I would imagine there has to be a high prevalence of virus in at least some animal. And I can understand that the Chinese have culled the animals, they've done things, but every sample I've seen does not have a lot of virus.
Yeah,
why is that?
That is a good question. So this is Jesse Bloom's analysis, really. I prepared some slides for that because I thought we maybe talk about that, and Sar talked about it. And there's a number of issues here. They sampled on multiple dates. They went through on January 1st, and they looked for the stalls with human cases, and then they came back January 12th, and they looked at the wildlife stalls. So those are later, so you're going to find more RNA in this is the two dates and why they took those samples. And you can graph the reads over time and color code these. And the ones with a lot of reads were the ones taken on January 1st. And there's less reads on January 12th. Here's another way to graph it actually by date. So read count on the first date is high, read count on the second date is low, and it keeps going lower. So that's one problem, is it's not an apples to apples comparison if you look at January 1st and 12th on the same plot. And Jesse's correlations do that. Like when he does this, when it's all dates and it says it's not wildlife. That's comparing both of them. This one is only January 12th. And you do actually find a few animals that come out at the top of the list, like the porcupines and the hedgehogs have a good correlation if you only look at the comparable samples. And yeah, you can break them up this way. Like if you only look at the January 1st ones, human comes out with the highest correlation. If you only look at the January 12th ones, animals come out with the highest correlation. And if you combine them, you get kind of a meaningless result where it's like fish, some weird stuff. So correlation. Animals that come out.
Do you understand this? So this was a graph. I don't remember who brought this up in their slides. It was bottom guy or top guy. But this chart, I guess, comes from some guy who tries to prove that in actuality, if you do the testing and you look at all the results, you actually see that it was basically random, that there wasn't any strong indicator that that there was, I guess, COVID RNA that was present in these particular cells for these particular animals. There is no strong indication about it, that it was a bullshit numbers thing. But it looks like, according to Top Guy is saying the only reason he got that result is because he was actually conflating.
And yeah, you can break.
That there were measurements on different days. And in your first days, you saw this, or in your first day, and then as the days go on, the data, the RNA they collect, tests less positive. And in order for him to get this graph, this Jesse Bloom guy, I guess, he basically took all of these days and he just crushed them into a single sample, or pretended that it was a single day, and then basically came up with this chart here. So the disaggregating of the data is meaningful here. This is why your initial numbers are important, and where your data comes from and what it means is important.
Come up this way. Like if you only look at the January 1st ones, human comes out with the highest correlation. If you only look at the January 12th ones, animals come out with the highest correlation. And if you combine them, you get kind of a meaningless result where it's like fish, some weird stuff. So should we expect to see a correlation? I mean, for one thing, the animals, if they brought it to the market, they were infected earlier, so there's more time for it to degrade. And the people who got infected on January 30th are the one that's going to have the highest read. There's also some weird ways here where they only sequence certain samples. So they sequenced the negative samples in the wildlife stalls, but they only sequenced, and they sequenced all positives, but included also the negatives to the wildlife stalls. So that throws off your correlation. The wildlife stalls are also diverse. They're selling a ton of different animals. So you're going to get like a bamboo rat and a raccoon dog there. So if you do look at only this correlation, you do get the porcupine and the hedgehogs are the best correlation of anything if you're comparing only the animal sampling day. Is it a porcupine based on that math? I don't know. I don't think you can actually conclude which animal it is from the. If I could tell you which animal it was, I'd be publishing this in Nature and not having this debate. This is a really important question in the world. Bloom said that there were like only one.
Just for around sanity, top guy is Peter and the bottom guy is Star. Yes, correct.
Relevant sample, but he left out 4 COVID positive samples, which had hedgehog DNA from that table. He also did this 20% criterion, and if you don't do that, it's hard to hit the 20% threshold because every shop is selling 5 animals, and he also included the chordates, which are the fish, not just the mammals, so it's really hard to hit the 20% threshold on that.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I'm with you 100%. I'm hearing what you're saying, but like if you go back to that table there, like they sequenced this to a depth of 1 × 10 to the 8th. I looked at that, and they're getting 124 reads. I think that's where the kind of I think there's just there's something unusual about that low a number. I'm not saying that it proves anything either way. I was just hoping that there was something that, you had seen in that, because that's this is a while ago.
Yeah. I mean, really the market argument is there's this really great evidence linking it to the market, this 1 in 10,000 coincidence. And this market is just like zoonotic spillover Disneyland. And that's why you would expect a zoonosis there. I don't think the data can actually tell you which animal it is. And also we know that they're COVID susceptible. Raccoon dogs can get and transmit COVID and SARS. So the animals are there, and the shop they were in tested positive 5 times, and that's our best lead relative to, it's the toilets or it's the mahjong room. Yeah, it's really low reads in that one sample. Jesse said, hey, how does that differ to the other one that said 0? And the one that he actually picked, I figured out which one he picked was 0. There are 0 other positive samples in that one shop, so I don't know why he picked that. Like, if one of the ones has 1 read, but it's also in a shop that has 5 reads, and the drains test positive, and the drains test positive again, that means more to me. Like if it was just 1 read and nothing else had happened in that shop, I would look at it differently. The correlation, like people can move around the market, but the caged animals can't. So the human virus should always be a stronger signal that's gone everywhere, but the raccoon dogs are stuck in cages. So if one shop is infected, does like that raccoon dog necessarily infect every raccoon dog in the market? Because that's mostly what Jesse proved, is that if it is raccoon dogs, it's only testing positive in 1 raccoon dog shop, though there may be raccoon dogs in other shops that are negative. And I don't know what your model is, whether they should all be infected or not.
That makes sense. I just want to pause there. That gives me plenty of what I was asking for. Eric, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, I think I'll start with a question for Sar. For all my questions, I'm interested in what both of you have to say, but I'm going to target at one person, and if the other person wants to rebut, and you want to spend your time on that, go ahead. I'm going to start with my second heaviest question, which is, in your Bayesian analysis, you give an update of 12 times in the impartial column for the Wuhan location, if I understand correctly. And I want to understand correctly that you're not double counting. You're not getting credit for the 12 times in two different places in your analysis. So
Hold on, I need to listen to that again, sorry.
in a very, which is, I'm going to go ahead, I have to say, but the question for Sar, for all my questions, I'm interested in what both of you have to say, but I'm going to target at one person, and if the other person wants to rebut, and you want to spend your time on that, go ahead.
Okay.
I'm going to start with my second heaviest question,
Okay.
which is, in your Bayesian analysis, you give an update of 12 times in the impartial column for the Wuhan location, if I understand correctly. And I want to understand correctly that you're not double counting. You're not getting credit for the 12 times in two different places.
Okay. Wait. So because of MAD, wouldn't Iran having a nuclear weapon make the Middle East more stable? We always hear that argument that nukes make nations more peaceful, so wouldn't this be true on a local level? No. MAD only works when both actors are rational, meaning they're worried about themselves being destroyed. So everybody having nukes doesn't necessarily make the world a more peaceful place. Now, that being said, I don't believe that if Iran had nukes, I don't think that they would nuke anybody. I feel like Iran is largely a rational actor. But the issue with Iran having nuclear weapons is that they do fund a lot of proxy-related terrorism, and it makes them a lot more impervious to direct attacks, basically. So it gives them a much stronger foundation to do terrorisms from, basically. And then there is like a small risk regardless, but yeah.
In your analysis. In a very simplistic manner, imagine that there are 12 cities, and Wuhan is the only one doing gain-of-function research, so if it shows up in Wuhan, we get a 12 times factor. But what I want to know, and I don't know, is if in these other 11 cities, there might be other processes that are not gain-of-function going on, either in labs, maybe something nothing to do with labs, and that if the pandemic had instead started in Chengdu, then we could be having this exact same debate today, but instead of it being the lab leaking gain of function theory, it's something else that's specific to Chengdu. So if every city has something specific to it that you can make a tailored pandemic origin, then you get the 12x in two different places. You get it once where you explicitly listed it, and you get a second time when we narrowed from 12 different theories to focus on lab leak gain of function, which is implicit by the existence of this debate. I don't know if there are these other theories, so I'm interested.
Oh, that sounded like a kind of an easy question that I feel like was a little silly, but it's actually a very, 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 very good question. What his question is we're having a lab leak debate, and the bottom guy is absolutely zero hope of answering this question. So listening to him stumble through the answer will, again, be funny. But what he's saying is, let's say that there are 12 labs in China in this region or whatever. 6, 7, 8, 9, wait. 10. He said there are 12 labs or whatever, right? Now he's saying, right now, this leaked, we all believe it leaked initially, near the Wuhan lab. And the Wuhan lab does red research, and we're saying that because it does red research, that's the reason why it leaked from the Wuhan lab. But he's saying, what if this exact same leak happened, but it happened near this lab? Could it be that we would have this exact same debate, but you would say, well, of course it leaked from this lab. They do blue research, and that's why. So what he's asking is how do you assign a probability to red research, in this case, gain of function research, as opposed to assigning a probability to any other type of research? For instance, maybe this lab does gain of function research, maybe this lab does human disease recovery research. Would we be arguing that that has a higher likelihood of disease escaping? Or what about this lab that deals with sick patients directly? Would we be saying that sick patient laboratory research has a higher chance of leaking it? Why did we assign such a high probability to gain-of-function research? Are you sure you're not picking that particular research specialty and trying to tie it into the reason why it escaped that lab? Are you sure you're not picking that retroactively? Did you consider any other theories and any other areas of research that these labs are committed to instead? That's a very, 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 very good question that the bottom right guy will have no answer for, especially because I think it was a concession at the very beginning that there has never been a gain-of-function lab leak in recorded human history. That has never happened before. So how are we choosing gain-of-function research as the reason why it leaked from this particular lab? I already know the answer he's going to say, I think. My guess is he's going to say, well, this is a new area of research that's gotten more sophisticated, and as a result of the higher degree of sophistication, there's a higher chance that it'll leak from there than any other place, but it would be hard to guess that number, or something stupid like this.
Implicit by the existence of this debate. I don't know if there are these other theories, so I'm interested to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, it's important to realize that I don't think anyone is contesting that WIV is especially active, especially risky. They do have the BSL-4. This is a place that is doing much larger scale of virology research, and especially gain-of-function.
Did he say was there just one other BSL-4 lab, or were there 11 other BSL-4 labs? Does anybody remember? I don't remember that part of the debate.
Having said that, there's no double counting here, because at other points we do talk about the specifics of WIV work. Okay, we go specifically for the diffuse proposal. We go specifically for
the diffuse proposal wasn't accepted, and you even said that, so you can't allow that. That doesn't make any sense.
The interests of the researchers there. So if
the interest of the researchers there, again, not to be a gatekeeper or whatever, but like, what do you think that in these labs? Do you think that the researchers go, "Oh, today I really want to study this, so let's do this, guys"? Like, what the fuck does that even mean? Like, how do we know, the bombing mission that happened over Iran? Well, we know the pilots. We know what Air Force base they came from. We know what kind of missions they like to fly there, so they probably did that. Like, what is that answer? What?
If we had the exact same virus in a different city, and it would match the WIV activity, that would be evidence against. So once you focus on WIV, okay, and you look at the specific activity there, then that's it. Then Wuhan is not double counted. Like,
if these judges were fair, based on the questions that they've asked both these people, because this guy in the bottom left has gotten relatively detailed questions, I would say. The most recent one about the quality of tested RNA material. Like, this guy was asking him about the specificity of a number that was an underlying number of research that he's citing to make an argument. That was a very specific question. This guy, a fair question would be, okay, can you speak with any degree of knowledge about the average type of research that happens at any of these labs? Can you give me the research schedule of the Wuhan Institute of Virology at all? What percentage of the research is done on these viruses? What percentage of the viral research is done on coronaviruses? What percentage of that is gain-of-function research? Can you speak with any level of specificity to any part of their research schedule at all? Or any lab research schedule at all, ever?
Is that clear, or?
That makes sense. I understand.
No, that's bullshit. I wouldn't. If I was his bottom lefty, I would be ass pained that these were my judges for this debate. Unless the judges, maybe it could also be that the judges have already made up their mind. The bottom right guy is hopelessly gone in this debate. But
your argument. Okay, I'm assuming Peter has no comment. I have a question for Peter.
I think we'll talk about double counting more in session 3. I think there's many ways where he might be doing it, but I don't. Today I just want to figure out if it's the market and some stuff like that.
Okay.
Like, I think his priors are generally too high for lab leaks. We're off by a factor of 100 roughly in terms of how, and I think we need to establish lots of things like that. But again, future discussion.
Okay, I have a question for Peter. If I understand correctly, on roughly slide 170, 171, you're talking about having 2 different spillovers from animal population to human population. And that seems unlikely to me. And to explain why, we imagine that in this environment, there are a very large number of different viruses present in the animals, in the wildlife, either specifically in the seafood market or generically across the globe. It seems like an overwhelmingly massive coincidence for the same virus to transfer from animals to human at the same time twice. It seemed, why couldn't a different virus have spilled over the next day or something like that?
This is a good question, and it is a challenging one, although one he already dealt with a bit. But again, this is a question that is asked, in my opinion, with more depth, and will be answered with far more depth, I imagine, as well, than the question that was posed to Bottom Guy. But
Oh, that's an easy question. I mean, because that virus is the one that infects humans. So like we already established, I pointed this out in my presentation, there was a bamboo rat coronavirus in the same shop that had a foreign cleavage site, and it's from southern China. So that proves that viruses can get across China, and foreign cleavage sites are relatively normal. It depends, whether it's sarbecovirus or whatever. But the bamboo rat virus didn't spill over because it doesn't have the right ACE2 binding, or it doesn't have the right stuff to get into humans. But once you do find a virus that has that right stuff, it's exceedingly likely that it's going to infect more than one person.
yes, but more specifically, that I don't believe that was responsive to the question, no. The question is, if you develop that virus, why wouldn't that singular virus that's highly infectious cross over, and then all of your origination is from that alpha lineage? Instead, there was an alpha and a beta lineage, so that virus was not only highly infectious to humans, it was highly infectious to humans but remained in animals long enough to evolve at least one time, and then both of those two different ones then passed on to humans. I think this guy asked a very good question. Wouldn't we have expected, if that was the case, to see 10 different lineages or 50 different lineages? Why only 2? That seems oddly specific, to have only two separate crossover events. It seems like it would be more likely to have a singular crossover event or 100 crossover events or some number much higher. I think this is a really good question, by the way, but I think it's an unfair question because this Bottom Guy isn't even equipped to ask it.
Does that make sense? Or I can give more metaphor. And this is what we expect with MERS had multiple spillovers to humans. It's completely
MERS might have had multiple spillovers, but across different time frames, right? Not in essentially, well, this might have been different time frames, so I guess, right?
normal. And we can see this actually when COVID spilled over into mink, it spilled back into humans. And the humans are the red in these trees and the mink are blue. So once it gets on a mink farm, it does repeat spillovers back into the people working on the mink farm. So we know that's normal.
I think the mink farm is different because once it's been spreading among humans, it's had time to adapt. I imagine that after a species jump, there has to be a period of quite intense and strong adaptation as it has to adjust to the new host. And after it's adapted favorably to humans and then it goes back to minks, I can imagine in that circumstance it's much easier to get back into humans again.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's the question of, is it pre-adapted? And that's really a debate.
No, that's not a pre-adapted question. The question was, my understanding is when we talk about SARS-CoV-2, the initial event where it transferred from animals to humans, the argument that the wet market people make is that there were 2 separate spillover events from 2 separate strains of SARS-CoV-2. That seems, intuitively, that seems unlikely. You would either have a singular spillover event or you'd have 50 or 100 spillover events. When we're talking about a spillover event here, if I'm understanding it correctly, the spillover event wasn't like SARS-CoV-2, that same virus linked from 2 different animals to 2 different people. It was that there was a different evolved form of it, a different strain of it that leaked. Not meaningfully different, but a different strain of it that leaked from one animal and then from another animal, is my understanding.
To question whether it had this accelerated evolution.
Sorry, Sweet Sauce at Destiny. SARS are spillovers driven by cryptoviral transspeciation and polyphagous epitope drift. Breach chiropteran omniduct via nucleocapsid hyperphrenation causing polyclonic viremia. True. Absolutely true. Thank you.
That's the question of, is it pre-adapted? And that's really a debate to question whether it had this accelerated evolution when it spilled over or whether it was pre-adapted to people. And that's an interesting argument that could be in favor of the lab, as Asar points out. Is it pre-adapted because they worked on that, or is it just pre-adapted by chance? So what I'm positing is that it has sufficient pre-adaptation to infect people for whatever random reasons, because it's this 1 in a million virus or whatever, but there's millions of viruses in nature, so there's bound to be one of them. And once you do get that virus, it's going to spill over multiple times. The actual spillover event isn't something magical. It's just, it could already do that.
Yeah, so my only... actually, I don't understand the difference between that alpha and beta lineage enough. I don't know. Maybe the beta and the alpha one aren't really that different at all, actually. Destiny, we don't know how many spillover events occurred. We know that that these two lineages, which were present in the wet market, once a virus is the adaptation to infect people, there's really no reason why you wouldn't expect it to happen more than once. Yeah, actually, I'm making a bad assumption here where I'm assuming that the alpha and beta lineage must have been sufficiently different from each other, but I guess they wouldn't have to have been that different, no? I guess.
But once it's in the shop, it can do that multiple times. I mean, I don't know if I love this metaphor, but I think this is Joel Wertheim also on the Picard paper, who talks about it being like, Mount Everest is hard to climb, and we went thousands of years, our whole species, without ever managing to climb it. But when we finally did climb it, we climbed it twice in a day. So you could say, what are the odds that that would happen twice? Well, you have all the conditions in place. You finally figured out how to do it. So 2 versus 1 is not a big deal.
Idiot.
Eric, I think you're muted.
Yeah.
Oh, no, you're not.
No, he is.
Sorry, did you want to respond to Peter directly, or I have a related question for you? I can go straight to that.
No, I agree that you should expect multiple spillovers once there's a virus infecting a wildlife population.
Okay. So, Sar, on your slide 20, we're talking about SARS-1 at this point. First, something really quick. You mentioned that there were 4 lab leaks, but on slide 20, I only see 3 lab leaks.
Yeah, one of them infected two lab workers 2 weeks apart.
Do you know which lab that is?
I think that's the Beijing one.
It's the one that's marked China 2004?
Yeah, I think it's that one. And by the way, that's an important reference point because the whole lineage A, lineage B is making a lot of it carries a lot of weight in the zoonosis claims. We do not think these are 2 separate lineages, but even if there are 2 separate lineages, we do have a case where that happened. We have 2 infections 2 weeks apart, which is that's 1 or 2 mutations. So that in itself is not strong evidence of against lab leak. But we'll discuss that session too. Yeah, that's it.
Okay. And then relevant to that...
Can I just point out, we are in disagreement on the number of SARS spillovers. It would take me time to get an exact number, but I think it's more than 3. Like, of these first 7 SARS cases, none of these are epidemiologically linked between these different cities. And even in the last SARS outbreak that happened in 2004, I think it's 4 cases, but they're not connected to each other. I'd have to go back over this paper to get an exact number, but I think it's more than 3.
Okay, and then related to that, I'm looking at still slide 20 where you have the 3 spillover events you show. If I understand correctly, so chronologically, of the 6 events on this slide, the very first one is the November 2002 event where a farmer presumably got sick with SARS-1 from an animal.
Fucked his
I'm
cow.
looking at this correctly.
Gross.
And then it transmitted from the farmer to the labs where the lab leaks happened via research on SARS-1. And then these 2 other spillover events that happened chronologically later, are we saying that the viruses that spilled over there are descended from the November 2002 spillover virus, or are they just independent? They've been circulating among animal populations entirely? I'm trying to understand.
So you have the civets constantly working on this virus, infecting each other, mutating. That's happening. Every now and then, a civet infects a human. Sometimes nothing happens. Sometimes secondary infections continue, and then you get an event. In parallel, scientists are constantly collecting samples usually from people, but also from the civets, working in them in the lab, and then getting infected and infecting other people sometimes.
Okay, so you're saying that the 3 spillover events you've listed on the slide are not descended from each other?
I don't
Or
think
you're
so.
guessing.
No,
Obviously, we don't know.
They shouldn't be, because all of these were controlled. All of these were eventually found and isolated, so nothing descends from these 3.
Okay. Yeah, please go ahead.
Do you mind if I just clarify on that? My understanding of these events were these were all laboratory stocks that were passaged. They popped them out of their liquid nitrogen freezer and they did something with them in these 3. Is that incorrect? Is there some more transmission? I thought these were all lab stocks that, they were passaging or doing experiments with.
I didn't look into the exact experiments.
You don't even know what caused the outbreaks?
That caused the infection.
Like, that could be an incredibly predictive piece of evidence. Like, what if all 3 of these outbreaks happened as a result of some condition that was incredibly similar to the conditions in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, right? Or what if all of these outbreaks happened in a way that would be incredibly dissimilar, would point against it, right? Like, why would you not be familiar with or want to know anything about literally any of the underlying stuff at all?
But it's not, the critical thing is that I'm trying to understand and just making sure I didn't misunderstand is it's not there was when they traced these transmission strains, or sorry, when they traced these lab acquired infection events, they all start in the lab, or there's some potential that they started where an environmental sample came to the lab, circulated, and then went back out.
Environmental sample? I don't think so. I think these are all results of experiments.
I'm not disputing that there are SARS lab leaks. I don't think they're from outside.
Sorry?
I'm not disputing you that these are SARS lab leaks.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. You're not what?
I'm not disagreeing that these are SARS lab
Okay,
leaks.
thank
I'm
you.
saying you can have that point. They didn't come from civets outside the lab. If that's what you're asking, Will.
Can I ask Eric one more question while we have SARS slides up here?
Yeah. Uh-oh.
Okay, I apologize for this being pedantic and possibly elementary, but I think that I need to understand this well, and I think it will help the audience as well understand it. I'd like to actually share my screen and just go through your kind of initial calculations, SAR. So let me...
Uh-oh. More math questions.
Wow, that's so annoying. Okay, well, let's see if this works. Can you see this, guys?
Yep.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that my understanding of this is correct, and I apologize if this is stupid or incorrect. So these are screenshots from the slide SAR on the calculations, and I've just reproduced it in the Excel sheet. So we've got these cells are you trying to estimate the probability of a lab leak. Is the lab leak is a proximal cause given that we've seen a pandemic using data sources that are different types of outbreaks and things like that. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, that's correct. And then these are your final estimates of the probability of lab leak updated for this adjustment of growth, and then you get the rounded, you just take these and round them down to produce that. Is that correct?
No.
Okay.
The two like row 12 and 13, these are the conditional probabilities of Wuhan being the location, given zoonosis and given lab leak. Okay, so it's P Wuhan given LL and P1 given Z. This is P1 given LL, lab leak, and above it's P Wuhan given Z, and it's not 10, 20, 30, it's 10%, 20%, 30%.
Right, yeah, that was just me. I was quickly preparing this, so okay.
Right, so now you take the probabilities you had before.
The likelihood of it emerging from Wuhan, if it's zoonosis, this 1.48%, just in case you weren't here for the last episode, he calculated that by just dividing the entire population of like all the urban centers in all of Southeast Asia with the population of Wuhan, and he came up with 1.48%. That's how he got that number, by the way. But
You apply the conditional probabilities, you normalize, and you get the new numbers.
Totally. Okay, thank you. That is all I needed. Okay, thank you.
Okay, shall I give another question for Peter? I'm looking at slide 27 of yours. So here we're talking about rural versus urban. You say, based on this paper, which I took a quick look at, that the virus is 30 times more likely to go...
so no factors other than population? Okay, I'm sorry. I am being a little bit disingenuous there. If it was a really big city, he did multiply that population by 2. Okay, my bad. I didn't include that essential calculation.
And we will only focus on cities, urban population in East Asia. So what we did is we went over basically all the countries you see here. Some of them, like India, got 50% because some of it seems to be low likelihood. And we got a total of 1.6 billion urban population. Wuhan is 12.3. For each country, we looked at the percent of urban population. 12.3 for Wuhan. We divide. And then, following feedback from Peter, we actually added another 2x for Wuhan being a large city because, indeed, it makes sense that density is important. So, calculating, we get 1.48% that Wuhan, if we're hearing about a new bat pandemic, Wuhan being the zoonotic source is 1.48.
So just so you can understand what his underlying data looks like. Data in huge, huge, huge quotes there. Okay. He's just assuming there is an equal likelihood of this virus emerging from every single large city in all of Southeast Asia, with no other analysis being done. But this just feels retarded. It is.
Distinct in a rural area. The paper is using...
Also, when he says large cities, he uses the word density afterwards. Now, I don't know how many math nerds we've got here. I don't know how many BS and mathematics guys we have, but you might remember from the upper echelons of your mathematics institutions, you might remember learning that density isn't just a function of size, it's also a function of space. So a city with 10 million people isn't necessarily more densely populated than a city with 5 million people if the city with 10 million people is 100 times larger. But, that's neither here nor there either, I guess. But, okay.
Virus is 30 times more likely to go extinct in a rural area. The paper is using, what I understand correctly, is what's called a Sapphire model, which is a sort of more extended version of the SEIR model. This is a box model where you say some people are susceptible, some people are infected, some people are recovered, and you imagine probabilities of flowing between the different boxes. This is obviously a very simplistic model that it doesn't. I believe such models are not very helpful for quantitatively understanding outbreaks. They're very helpful for understanding how different factors influence an outbreak. Like they're good as a framework for understanding what's relevant to an outbreak, but they're hard for like predicting, how many people will be sick in 2 months and stuff like that. Now, in the paper, the author writes that if they imagine that people in a rural area have to afford as many connections as a person in an urban area, and you just plug it into the model, then the probability of not going extinct goes down by a factor of 30. And this is a completely trivial result because the model has, I don't want to say no complexity, but it's very obvious. If you lower one of the parameters, you get a lower result. It seems to be that this whole claim that it's more common in urban areas is entirely rooted on this unsourced assumption people in rural areas have fewer connections. It makes some amount of sense, but I sort of would like to see more of an argument. If we're going to get a 30 times factor here in this probability calculation,
He's asking this to the bottom right guy, right? I think he is, right? Okay.
I'd like to see more than, rural people have half as many connections.
Yeah, that's a good question. And so first off, Sar and I are not in dispute over this anymore. He's already incorporated that factor in. And he's a few other things he pointed out, like it could happen
He's asking bottom left guy this, or?
in Laos or Vietnam or something like that. I did not include those in my calculation. He's correct, I probably should have. I don't know if the cuisine differs there, but for the most part, the population there is much smaller than China, so it's not really going to be a big increase overall. But if we are going to argue over this, we could do it empirically, and we could point out that the people in these regions have seropositivity to SARS viruses. Like there was a study on Yunnan villagers which had like 3% seropositivity, but you don't have pandemics starting in Yunnan. And it's hard to get the exact numbers because there aren't a lot of pandemics, and we only have SARS and SARS-2. And in both of them, they started in big cities and not on these farms. So the data we do have says they always start in big cities, even though the majority of the people that are infected by seropositivity is overwhelmingly higher. So, if you just do it in ratio of antibodies, it's going to actually be a lot more than 30x.
I just feel like it's crazy that he gets to ask a question about, he's asking a question about, so one of your numbers was sourced from a study, and in the study, the authors cite another study for how they determine the amount of connections. Can you justify that? That's a very end of the question. That's a good question. That requires a remarkably sophisticated grasp of your number, the study that cites your number, and then the underlying studies that are being cited by your study that justify the number, and then explaining that. And he's able to do it with parallel, with related information, right? Like, there's also studies of, I'm guessing seropositivity has to do with your susceptibility to contracting a particular illness, I guess. But he's familiar with all of this. Bottom right guy hasn't been able, the bottom right guy wouldn't even understand this question. What? I feel like that's so crazy, but okay.
I have not actually worked with this model. It's just kind of confirming the obvious based on the data.
Okay, so a few things. If I understand correctly, SAR...
No presence of antibodies in the blood. Gotcha, okay.
...used a 2 times factor, and you're using a 30 times factor to represent essentially the
No,
same
I'm using a 2 times factor. I'm just ruling out I'm saying because it's a 30x factor, I ruled out the half of the population that's rural, and I got...
I see. Yes, that makes sense. That's a 2 times as well.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
And then when you said we've observed the pandemic start in cities and not rural areas, when you say start, are we talking about the first observed cluster? Are we talking about where the spillover event happened? What do we mean?
First observed cluster. We never observed a spillover event for SARS. We have no idea where SARS started. There's some.
Okay.
They found Yunnan cave bats with a virus that's 96% similar, and it took 5 years of surveillance on one cave to find that. And Rootclaim is always saying you can't use any evidence unless you have a comparative data set everywhere. So by his reasoning, we haven't looked at any other caves for 5 years. We have no idea where the actual virus is. It could be in Hubei, it could be a different Yunnan cave. Based on that connection, Xi Zhengli has a hypothesis that it spilled over in Yunnan and got to Guangzhou, but there was never a Yunnan case for SARS. There was never a Yunnan infected civet for SARS. I came up with an argument it might have started in Hubei, but we don't have the bats there that are close enough. The difference with COVID is that we do think we have the spillover, and that's actually pretty rare for a disease.
Okay, and related to this, I'm not quite sure exactly how to phrase this question, but you're saying urban areas are more likely than rural. What I'm trying to get at is this the same phenomenon for when we've been looking at all these population maps of Wuhan, and I can't help but notice that the market is basically the most urban area of the city. Is it the same phenomenon where you said, what's the chance that a randomly selected person being sick is so close to the market? Well, if the market's the urban area and you think urban is more likely than rural, is that a bias or is that not?
The market, they're measuring these case originations with a pretty high degree of specificity, right? We've measured things down to the stall. I don't think it's fair to say that the market is an urban area. The urban area is the urban area. The urban area is a big area, I imagine. There's probably a lot of, there are varying levels of population density within that area, some of which I would imagine would be higher than the wet market. I feel like he said that in his opening, but maybe not, but we'll listen, I guess.
I don't know if you have that 30x within a city. Let me share my screen again. So a couple things. The SARS cases, I think Rootclaim said he was a farmer in Foshan. I looked that up. The very first case, he wasn't like a civet farmer or anything. It's hard to be clear on his occupation. He had animal contact, but he cooked food, which was chicken, a cat, and snake. And then these other ones, only one of them has civet exposure. So it's pretty hard to know how any of these SARS outbreaks started, only that they were in cities. As far as the density question, I think I put those up earlier. So this is my argument there. The Huanan market is a bullseye on the market, and it's not a bullseye on
density.
If it was right in the middle of this area, then maybe you'd have a better case for that. I do think there's some evidence that you're seeing more cases in those heat clusters, but there's no population density right there. And also it's a place that has something that can create a pandemic. If this was a movie theater right there, I wouldn't be arguing for zoonosis, because it doesn't have something that you need a market or a lab, I guess. Or China says you can get frozen food, but there's not, a mahjong room all by itself can't create a pandemic. A mahjong room nearby raccoon dogs can. Yield.
Okay, Will, do you want to do some questions or else I can just keep going?
I have one question that might take a little bit more time. I'd like to go through
your numbers?
The animal versus other piece that you had in your slides, because that was a fairly complex analysis, and I'm going to be honest, I need more time to absorb it, but I'd like to talk through it again and ask some specific questions.
I also am going to have questions about that, so after you go, I'll follow up with related.
Totally, you can just jump in. So my understanding of this is, okay, so this is part of the Steele Manning, the case. We're going to construct the best possible case here for what it would look like under zoonosis for the pandemic to emerge in the market. Ultimately, you conclude that even under zoonosis, the pandemic it started at the market, but for other reasons, and that's because of a variety of different factors. Is that just the general?
Yes.
Okay, so maybe on the next slide. So the no animal vendors, and I apologize because I feel like I've seen this claim multiple times, but I don't understand. No animal vendors were infected. Do you both agree on that, or do you think that there was do we think that animal vendors were infected? Like this, it seems like Peter had data that said animal vendors were infected, or maybe can you guys just clear that one up for me?
My opinion is we can't prove that because none of them were tested. None of them, there's no antibody testing, and you only find COVID. You find 19 out of 20 you find 1 out of 20 COVID cases, and the other 19 are missed. So.
Okay. So the 5 people that those initial cases were
not
either
animal traders. Yeah.
Yeah.
But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence.
Okay, and then going. So you say that there's 1 positive raccoon dog sample, but there's only 1 read and negative correlation overall. Peter shares the evidence of the stall, I believe 829 or 825, where there were 5 positive. Frozen samples. It seems like this analysis discounts that. Why?
So I need to look back into it. I think this is about having the 20% threshold or not, but I'm not sure. I'm sure Peter would remember what's the difference, but we can check it.
Okay, but globally it's just the this you would not feel would significantly affect the analysis whether or not there was 5 or 10 or something like that. Or
No, no. In general, the important thing is that there is less SARS-2 reads associated with wildlife. Peter brought an interesting point about it possibly being due to an artifact due to different timings. We'll need to look into that. I doubt this will be enough because we're talking about an animal sitting in a cage for days with SARS-2. You will need to detect that at significant amounts, but I'll need to look. I'll wait to get all the new slides when he shares them, and I'll look into it.
Okay, that makes sense. And then final question, skip 2 slides down to the final animal estimate. Okay, so the Bajong Hall has this very high positivity rate. It looks like it's, you all differ on why the positivity rate is there or what's going on in there. What is your estimate of how much more likely it is to spread in the market, in the Mahjong Hall, versus other areas? What's your probability estimate there, or what's your factor? Like, let's say a mall versus the Mahjong Hall, or a mall versus Wuhan market in general.
Okay.
So here the Mahjong evidence, it's not only it's existing, there's the fact that in many cases, that's given only 30 to 40%, so it's not that big, so 2.5 to 3x. I think the market is a likely super spreader location for multiple reasons that...
He's about to give qualitative stuff, right? He's going to say it's humid, it's hot, it's whatever. Like he doesn't have any way of like arriving at these numbers compared to the mall. Or maybe, I'm sorry, my bad. Maybe he's about to give very specific estimates and measurements and stuff sourced from other studies. My bad.
That I list, not only the Mahjong Hall. The Mahjong Hall, I think, is one of the contributing factors.
But I think, okay, totally understand. I think I asked the question poorly, but this is...
Or you'll just say nothing. Et cetera, et cetera. Okay, my bad.
Building on Eric's earlier question. So imagine that sick researchers visit 100 different locations. The probability that, COVID is able to take hold in the Wuhan market in general versus the Mahjong Hall versus a random mall. I think that's what I'm asking you to estimate, if that is reasonable within the framework.
Right, so the factors we're looking for are high traffic. So where is that? High traffic. So that's basically that there's a large probability that the lab worker would get there. Second is that we have permanent residents that will amplify locally, having this making this place noticeable. Otherwise, it's just people infecting all over town, so you don't notice it. And the other is having the enclosed poor ventilation in the elderly population, which make the exponent higher, right? So it will grow faster. So I think there are not many places that meet all of those. I think that seeing Chinfadi as the next outbreak is interesting. Peter made a very good point about it being traced to frozen food. That's fine, but I assume there's also deliveries of contaminated with SARS-2 going to many places in China. This is still the place that amplified it. So I think there's something about these areas that are good amplification environments.
Okay, so let me dig in. That makes a lot of sense, but let me dig in more there. So my mental conception is probably wrong of the market. My mental conception is that ventilation is reasonably high. You both agree that ventilation in these markets is very low. Is that a point of shared agreement? Like the amount of air turnover per unit time is like...
It's a closed market. This is not an open air market, yes? This is
right.
This is a closed building, yes.
I don't think I agree with that. I don't think, like, compare this to a bar or a restaurant. I think the ventilation is much, much worse than the person-to-person transmission. Those are much more enclosed spaces. Or the university. I don't understand how he's ruling out universities here. He says it's because they're young, so I guess you wouldn't find them, but you can still have spread. And you have residents there, you have professors, and you have students that come to class every day, so you have people, you have repeat visitors. You could say it wouldn't be found because the people are young, but we already established with the exponential math that there aren't a lot of undetected cases. There's really just these like 100 cases and these 5 hospitalized. So you really still have to pick, is the first super spreader a restaurant? Is it a university? Is it the market? You only really get one of them.
Okay, to continue to focus in on this. So okay, so we have disagreement about what the probability is of spreading given that you're in the market and what factors are there. What do you think about the train station located close by SAR? Like, I think of that as, again, this is intuitive, and when I was doing my own research, when I was, trying to avoid getting COVID, I looked at air handlers in trains versus air handlers in, HEPA-filtered airplanes. And it seemed like I could find no worse spot than a train to be in during COVID, just given the amount of air turnover per unit time. So do you think it is worse than a train? Do you think someone just didn't make it to a train, or like is the mahjong room possibly worse? Can you compare it in that context to my intuition?
So I think a mahjong room is worse than a train or a bar. I think a train or a bar is worse than a market. But the important thing is that the train doesn't have the repeat visitors, the repeat population. So yeah, so the lab worker went to the train, infected 3 people next to him, but that's it. These people are now in 3 different locations across the town. They don't meet again to start the amplification in a closed environment. Okay, so they're infecting people in different places, right? And the places they're infecting are not as high exponent as the market. So you have the people returning to the same high exponent location, and that's what gives you the amplification. Because if you just infect people on the train, okay, so you infect on the train 5 people instead of 3 people that you do in the market. Cool, but still they're now gone. They're now gone, and they're now they're now infecting people in low exponent locations or 0. They're not infecting anyone, right? So you need to have this repetition, the cycle that.
Am I retarded? I don't understand that argument at all. Is he saying that like if the same people are sick, they make each other even more sick and they amplify their own sickness? Or I don't that can't possibly be what he's saying, right? I must be misunderstanding this. That can't possibly be what he's saying.
So they're infecting people in different places, right? And the places they're infecting are not as high exponent as the market. So you have the people returning to the same high exponent location, and that's what gives you the amplification. Because if you just infect people on the train, okay, so you infect on the train 5 people instead of 3 people that you do in the market. Cool, but still they're now gone. They're now gone, and they're now they're now infecting people in low exponent locations or 0.
But if you infect 5 people in a train versus 3 in the market, that would make the train the high exponential location definitionally, no? Because your R naught is higher because you're infecting on average more people. So wouldn't that be entirely self-defeating, what he's just saying there?
0, they're not infecting anyone, right? So you need to have this repetition, this cycle that feeds itself, this feedback loop.
Okay, that is not intuitive to me in the sense
Yeah, I don't understand the fuck at all what that means. I have no idea what he just said.
that so I understand what you're saying, where if there are transmission trains, for lack of a better word, the end of transmission train occurs because people board the train and they go elsewhere and they're not in a permissible environment. That makes sense, but I think of like almost every pandemic planning scenario I can think of, or every kind of, doomsday scenario, it's somebody gets on, there's a dissemination event where you get on a train, you go somewhere and you spread out a whole bunch of different places. To back that intuition up, I guess I would say that if you get repeat visitors to the same location, in kind of a standard SIR model, more and more of those people become resistant. Your transmission probability should go down, or at least the number of hosts who are at risk goes down. So it seems to me like...
Yeah, like if I could choose between sending 10 people into the same thing over and over again over 1 month, like we'll say 8 times, twice a week, versus sending 10 people in the first time and then sending those same 10 people into a different place for the other 7 times, even if the first place is high transmissibility, I feel like you'd spread the disease way fucking more. I don't understand. I might just be I don't understand this bottom point at all. I don't understand it at all.
Probability should go down, or at least the number of hosts who are at risk goes down. So it seems to me like a train, getting people on a train would be a much, much more likely...
I think what he's saying is you are never going to have a month-long cluster on a train, right? Like, he's not denying people can get sick on the train, but they're not going to be a cluster that extends over multiple weeks on a specific train.
But why would
the cluster be self-contained to the market? Or how long is he saying the cluster be self-contained to the market for?
So I think the thing that I'm asking is if...
But you can
okay, so
speak
you're
for
just,
yourself.
Yeah, yeah. We're not debating about. Is that a fair answer, Sar, to what was Eric saying?
Yeah. I think maybe I'll try to make like a more clear simulation of that, a diagram that actually shows what happens. Yeah, but the idea is that you want the people returning to the same location with high infectivity. So people on the train, they're there just for 1 hour in the high infectivity environment, and then they're in the average. But in the market, you have the same people in the high infectivity environment all the time. Even if for 1 hour the train is more, this is repeat day after day for many hours. So I think that's much more important in terms of the long-term exponent.
Okay, I understand.
I don't understand. I don't know. I have no idea.
Probability of producing a cluster. Okay.
Right. I think the disagreement, you're talking, Will, about the total number of cases, and Sarah's talking about the chance of a specific cluster showing up.
Gotcha. Yep. Thank you.
Can I just bring up one point again that might have been missed? We keep talking about the mahjong room as like this the cluster or the hotspot. There were no positive samples in the mahjong room. What we have is an over-smoothed heat map that points to the mahjong room if you look at it that way. But the actual samples were in the shops And if you average enough of those samples together, the average centroid is the Mahjong room.
Point taken. I think the thing, I mean, I think I was trying to get to this earlier. The fact that like even the most abundant sample that has been found of a sampled animal with 130 reads at 1e⁸,
Correct.
You know, or 1e8, like it doesn't seem particularly likely that you would, even if Mahjong room was a very important place that had a bunch of spreading, that environmental samples would come up positive. Do you disagree with that?
I think if it was, I mean, the stalls where people were infected had samples in them, and the wildlife shops had samples in them that lingered until February, but the Mahjong room didn't have any at all. And I'm not saying that people didn't go in there and cough, or even that there didn't occur some human-to-human transmission. I'm just saying that people are misinterpreting a heat map to say that the samples were there when there were actually no samples there. And this is funny because we also have this heat map of the cases outside the market, which points right at the market, and they object to that because they think you can't use that kind of logic. But within the market, the heat map points to something, the Mahjong room, that they want to be the location, and they think that's a good argument. So that's pure motivated reasoning to say this style of analysis doesn't work outside the market, does work inside the market. And the center of the heat map outside, we know it's the market because...
Are you able to follow this jargon? This seems so specialized. Yeah, he's saying bottom dude, loser. And he's saying that my heat maps were fucking hot as fuck. Boy! What he's saying is that you have different ways of measuring where you believe that the virus came from inside of a given place, okay? Let's pretend that this is the Mahjong room, and then let's say that this is an animal stall, 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 okay? And then we'll say we have like other animal stalls as well. What he's saying is the actual samples themselves, where they found positive samples, are like all over here, okay? Some here, here, and here, and here. This is when he's saying this is what tested positive in the stalls, and then maybe some drain here, okay? He's saying that the heat map though, right? When you draw a heat map, what you're doing is you're overlaying this whole thing, okay, with a gradient of color, and you're creating some kind of topology where the more actual discrete data points there are, the more you emanate some higher gradient of that color. You're creating a map that will look like, like super, super, super red here, kind of sort of red here, and then kind of sort of orange here. And what we're assuming is based on the heat map, we're guesstimating like, we're looking, okay, well, we can look on the aggregate, like where do we think the samples came from? Where do they originate from? But the problem is that if you draw a heat map of this, the center of the heat map gives this false impression that the Mahjong room must have had a whole bunch of COVID in it. But that's just an illusion created by the averaging of all of the discrete values together for the creation of a heat map. Because when the discrete samples are tested, or looked at, nothing came from the Mahjong room. And his problem is he's saying, just to be clear, guys, nothing tested positive in here. You know that, right? They're just using heat maps and they're kind of making it look like it centered from the Mahjong room. And then he's saying, keep in mind that when we go out of the wet market, all of a sudden they don't like heat maps anymore, showing that it seemed to originate. They're saying the heat map is actually creating like these data artifacts where it looks like it's originating from the wet market, but it's actually places around the market. So sometimes they like heat maps, sometimes they don't. So he's bringing up the actual discrete data points, and he's trying to clarify, just to be clear, there are no discretely collected samples from the Mahjong room, right?
So that's pure motivated reasoning to say this style of analysis doesn't work outside the market, does work inside the market. And the center of the heat map outside, we know it's the market because the first 5 cases were there. So it's just confirming that with the heat map. If the first 5 cases were in the Mahjong room, of course that analysis would be good. But it's really just this Texas sharpshooter fallacy of, we don't want it to be the market, we want it to be the lab, so what can we put in that spot? And they tried the toilets, and then they tried the Mahjong room. And also, as I pointed out with Shimfati market, you can confirm the bullseye on market cases with Shimfati. That also has the centering. I can pull up more heat maps if you want me to show them on the screen to confirm what I'm saying. The actual bullseye is shop 629, which had the most positive samples. That's what and the ratio is low, the positivity is low. I don't know why that is. I think it might be because the animals were sampled earlier. Could be because animals, shed less than people. I really don't know why that is. I think it's amazing that DNA can confirm, this is 12 days after the market's been closed, and maybe like more than a month after the spillovers happened, and you can still use modern DNA technology to figure out which animals were in that shop and where they were infected. And I think we kind of expect more than we should from these results, from this technology. I mean, it'd be great if you could just run a test that's, spits out the name of the animal, but that might be expecting too much.
Just curious, for SARS-CoV-2, when we talk about like an RNA virus, is it wrapped in anything when it transmits from person to person, or is it just like fucking a raw string? No, it can't just be. It's got to be. There has to be something. Is it? What is it? Or what are they? Can we look this up? SARS-CoV-2. Wikipedia. It's called a capsid. Like Capri Sun. Each SARS-CoV-2 virion is 60 to 140 nanometers in diameter. Its mass within the global human population has been estimated to be between 0.1 and 10 kilograms. Why? Why do they even guess that? What's the point of that? Okay. Like other coronaviruses, SARS-CoV-2 has 4 structural proteins known as the spike, the envelope, the membrane, and the nucleocapsid proteins. The N protein, holds the RNA genome, and the S, E, and M proteins together create the viral envelope. Coronavirus S proteins are glycoproteins and also type 1 membrane proteins, membranes containing a single transmembrane domain oriented on the extracellular side. They are divided into 2 functional parts, S1 and S2. In SARS-CoV-2, the spike protein, which has been imaged at the atomic level using cryogenic electron microscopy, is the protein responsible for allowing the virus to attach to and fuse with the membrane of a host cell. Specifically, its S1 subunit catalyzes attachment, and the S2 subunit fusion. Okay. So it's not just raw RNA that just sits somewhere. It does have an envelope as well. Okay.
I think I hear what you're saying. The majority of my background was in NGS used for microbial samples, so I have deep kind of knowledge of the inner workings of how that works, and that's why I'm so focused on it, is that this is that. So that's, I mean, yeah.
I just want to comment that we do have multiple testimonies of mahjong players being the early cases, so it's not
Oh my God.
just the environmental sample.
But the very first case was not, and you maybe picked 4 and 5 were maybe mahjong players, so that's not what introduced it to the market. I provided the translated interview with Wei Guisheng. She doesn't play mahjong, so it was there before. I mean, maybe you could find an earlier mahjong player if you looked.
Yeah, I assume she's not the first case, yes.
So what brought it into the market?
That we don't know what is the very first patient zero in the market, but it's under lab leak, it would be a person. We don't know if the person is the lab worker, it's someone he played mahjong with, if it's family, we don't know. But the fact that so many cases are mahjong players is something that is worth paying attention to.
Eric, did you have questions on that analysis? Oh, you're muted.
Muted, idiot.
I had questions about the animal versus other slides around slide 75. If you're done asking about that, Will.
Is this one or?
Okay, so yes. So actually, can you go to the next slide, please? If I understand correctly, I'm not going to nitpick the numbers here. That's not what I'm asking. I want to understand what the numbers mean. So we have 2 hypotheses you've raised, the animal hypothesis and the other hypothesis, and several observations. We're trying to figure out if these observations are consistent with hypotheses. Are each of these probabilities, this is probability of that observation given this hypothesis, is that correct?
Yeah, so we're saying, okay, I'm telling you there's a market and an animal brought a virus there. In how many cases would you expect this to happen? In how many cases would you expect this to happen? So that is basically what these numbers say.
Okay,
It's
so you're
the
saying that
probability of the evidence given the hypothesis animal.
Okay, and then imagine this evidence to be uncorrelated with each other. At the end, we can multiply all these together, and we get a total probability of all of the evidence given the hypothesis. I think that's correct. I might want to double check that. And then you get a final probability of a small number. And I thought you were going to do the same thing on the other hypothesis. So we have the hypothesis for animals, and we get this conditional probability. And the hypothesis for other, and I was expecting you to go through the same lines of evidence and say probability of observing this given the hypothesis, probability of observing this given this hypothesis, and the end multiplying and getting two different probabilities, and then you can do the ratio between them. But in the others, you're listing, you chose different evidence for the two things. So like,
I'll explain. So,
yeah, go ahead.
The idea is that all of these are expected under other, right? I don't need to estimate the probability that we won't have high infections among animal vendors because there's no reason to expect that, right? So I don't need to reduce this this hypothesis for evidence that is what is expected if there's no animal, right?
So
What? No, he's saying what is the So for the animal one, you said like, well, if this was the case, how likely would it be for it to be zoonotic? If this was the case, and then you gave all the probabilities, you multiply them together. You should be doing the same thing here, where what is the chances of for an infected worker? What are the chances from this lab? And then multiplying them all there. Well, I don't know what the fuck he just said here. What?
What is expected if there's no animal, right?
So are you saying that there's a 100% probability that sorry, I'm looking at slide 76. Yeah, is there a 100% probability that biased data is centered on the market but unbiased isn't, conditional on other?
Right. So it's
you put 50% conditional on animal.
So what we do here is we take the important aspect of the evidence, not the specific. So
He's just saying the important, not the specific. Bro, he's just about to fucking yap. And this guy is like, he even clever. I'm not going to ask you a specific question about where any of the fucking numbers come from. My God.
I think this pattern in general is something we'd say, yeah, is 100% under other. Now note that I'm also giving it 100% here in the conservative estimate, right? So of course it's not 100% because all kinds of things can happen. But in the essence of what this evidence, can you put mute, Peter, please?
The food tactics.
So in the essence of what this evidence is, then
oh no,
yeah, it's 100%.
Okay, I mean, I think it's really hard to pin down good numbers. So I imagine having a leeway of a factor of 2 here and there. I understand. So in the animal, all these things we're talking about 50%, 30%, factor 2, factor 3, and I mean I'm not ready to accept them as 100% in the other category. And so you got all these factors of 2 piling up, and innocently, individually they look innocent. You multiply them together, and suddenly you have a 0.0081% probability.
Yeah,
I just feel like there's more diligence needed to justify this comparison. That's all I have to say.
I understand what you're saying. So this is something I should have explained. So it's not the probability of the specific evidence as described, but in the essence, in the way that we have evidence that is inconsistent with an animal. What is the probability that we would have evidence inconsistent with an animal in this field? That's a probability. I'm talking about the whole possibility. And then it's, of course, 100%. So if I'm asking you, what is the probability you would get evidence inconsistent with an animal when there's no animal, then that's 100%. So I need to clarify that this is not the probability of the exact evidence, but the probability that this evidence would not be consistent with an animal.
What?
Okay, and I guess I did have one last thing on this line, which is on slide 78. We're talking about the location superspreader. You have the numbers times 10 increase, conservatively times 4. I mean, those are not probabilities. What are they?
So these are, so this is the conditional probability on the other hypothesis. So it's I should put it over there, but it kind of makes it weird. So basically what I'm saying is that, so this was about what? This was about, saying that the HSM is very, very rare, but we're saying no, it has a lot of features that make it a good superspreader location, especially when we consider this as a non-linear thing, right? So if a slight advantage to the market over 3 weeks would be a huge advantage. So so we're saying that what is the probability?
Well, like what he's saying is like, there's no percentage tied to this. You're just like this is like given like 100% basically. Like what are we even saying here?
That the first superspreader location would have these.
You're not comparing like things basically. These are different. These things here are different than what was in the other on the right side of your previous slide.
Would have these features if it's an animal. right? So you can think of it as like.
You mean if it's not an animal, right?
If there's an animal infecting there, then these become less important because the animal can drive the infection. There's a source. If it's not an animal, then these things become important. Okay, so become more important. So the question is, what is the probability of having all these features? It's much more likely if there's no animal. Okay, if the reason is that a person got there, then we need these things to happen. If it's an animal, then we need them less. Okay, so that is 10x, 4x is the ratio between these conditional probabilities.
Okay,
That
so
is-
I should think of this as a 10% in the other column.
Yeah, maybe 5% and 50%, something like that.
Right.
Yeah,
What the fuck?
Okay,
numbers that
so,
are.
yeah, you're
I should-
computing
I
a
should
ratio
clarify
implicitly.
these, yeah.
Okay.
And I guess while I'm grilling you on what these numbers mean,
Grilling.
I have my main question I'm most interested in understanding is not specific to COVID origins at all, which is your motivation behind this. You've set out from the very beginning is to sort of demonstrate a technique of thinking about and approaching problems, which I think could be called a sort of a Bayesian reasoning. I don't know if you have another label you want to use.
Probabilistic inference is the word we use.
Probabilistic inference. And you said far better than any human inference method, which is a very bold claim.
Yep.
And what I want to hear is I want to hear some justification, because this is either justification in general or justification specific to this application. Because so as a mathematician, I'm used to, you start with some things you know to be true, and you make logical deductions, and you end up with something you know to be true. And I'm ready to accept that in the real world, it's not so easy. You're never sure at any point. It becomes much harder to try to use these deductive reasoning in the real world. And I'm ready to accept, Bayes. I think we're all ready to accept Bayes' theorem for as a computational tool in cases where we know all the probabilities. Like we know the prior probability is 10%, we know the update is 2.5, and then we can compute, given a little trouble, the correct new probability. And I will accept that it's very useful as a framework for understanding, is this evidence important? Put a number on it and then be like, oh, I guess it was only a 1.1. Maybe this evidence shouldn't be important. I shouldn't think about it too much. And maybe this evidence, there's a 1 in 12 chance. That's actually quite important. So I am very happy to accept this approach as a way of building understanding, and forcing people to commit to probabilities and stuff like that. I'm not ready to dive into, I can compute some numbers and get a numerical answer at the end. So yeah, I'd like to imagine, suppose all of these numbers were correct. Does that mean your conclusion is correct? So I don't have one specific question. I want you to say, is your method right? Is what I want to know.
Right. Yeah. So I think the main point to bring across here is that this is about being less wrong. Okay. So it's not that this is perfect. It's that this is a methodology that has been thought about very carefully. A lot of.
I'm sorry. He said probabilistic inferencing because he didn't want to call it Bayesian inferencing. What's the difference between this and just some basic? Did I miss something? Because I feel like this entire thing is just some kind of very basic Bayes theorem stuff or whatever. Isn't that just you have some prior assumption of an event, the likelihood of it, and then you update that prior with a bunch of other things to create some posterior probability, and that's it. What is fundamentally different or special here?
Potential weaknesses were identified and accounted for. It has stood at the test of time. I think we have a track record of being in a minority opinion several times and winning. Weaknesses were identified and accounted for. It has stood at the test of time. I think we have a track record of being in a minority opinion several times and winning. But most importantly is that people are very bad at this. Okay, so people are very bad when you give them a lot of evidence and there's a lot of uncertainty. They just mess up badly. They just get very. I mean, there's we can do some riddles and demonstrate it, but people will go way off on probabilities. That's why people don't use that, because they try a bit and then they see that it doesn't work. So this is about going through the exact weaknesses and identifying why people fail in probabilities and making sure that doesn't happen. So we make sure we don't filter evidence, and make sure we count the prior probability, and make sure we try to get numbers that are justifiable. And if not, then we give them a wide range. So it's about not double counting and making sure you account for dependency. So there's a lot of that, and sometimes you make mistakes. But if you do this, you're way better than what a human can do. That is the claim. So yeah.
Okay. Is it that? I'm not saying they're paid off. Well, I mean, he lost his debate anyway. I guess the other guy won, but that's not a real answer, right?
That is the claim. So yeah.
Okay.
Can I add?
Yeah,
add
please go
on
ahead.
that as a question?
Okay, whatever.
So one of the things I've been struggling with too in evaluating the framework, sorry, I think is maybe adjacent to Eric, so not as intelligent perhaps, is how should I treat the assessments of other people? Obviously, you shared 3 Bayesian assessments that gave high probability of a lab leak. It seems like my reading of the intelligence community is that it's majority non-lab leak. It's majority zoonosis. They have access to evidence that we do not. Like I could construct some.
I thought the U.S. intelligence community, or maybe he means broadly, because I think U.S. intelligence community said that they feel it's lab leak right now. I thought.
Intuitive scenarios in which they have a better estimate than anything we can do here. How should I treat that kind of claim, or how should that factor into my assessment of your claims or this method?
Right. So we found very clearly that having good inference is far more important than having good evidence. Okay. So yeah, if you have a smoking gun, that happens 1 in 100 cases. Okay, cool. But usually that doesn't happen, and usually you need to be. It's much more important that you understand the evidence you have than having a bit more evidence. So first of all, I'm not sure the intelligence community does have any evidence here because, as we see, they do try to leak it, and it doesn't seem very strong. I mean, we agree with Peter that the claim of 3 sick workers is not reliable enough. We have very bad experience with evidence that's based on anonymous sources, so we don't do that. We have an experience of beating intelligence agencies, so we know that. I myself have the experience there, and I know it's at the end of the day just people writing documents. It's not. They don't have the any advanced inference system compared to people. They actually have a lot of biases. So one bias is that because they have secret information, they overweight that. So they think.
This is actually somewhat true. Super forecasters have outperformed intelligence agencies with less evidence. Hold on. Are super forecasters, are you talking about like massive, like betting markets basically? Is that what a super forecaster is? Because if that's the case, I would say that it's a little disingenuous to say the evidence doesn't matter there, but your inferences matter. Because one, it's not even like those people are using inferences instead of evidence, but you're looking at 2 fundamentally different ways of trying to hone in on the correct solution to a particular problem there. And also you're going to be highly restricted probably to the types of problems that super forecasting can solve versus not, right? Like you might be able to ask a general question, but maybe more specific questions would be a lot more difficult. Oh, somebody said a super forecaster is typically individuals in betting markets with a very high accuracy rate. As the percentage forecast to be shown to, by statistical means to have been consistently more accurate than the general public or experts. Research finds that such forecasters are typically more accurate than experts in the field who do not use analytical and statistical techniques. Oh, that might be true, but those are also kind of, but they wouldn't be more precise than experts who do use statistical analytical techniques. I mean, I think I would believe that intuitively, but okay.
I think because others don't have it, and it's therefore stronger, but it's not. I mean, it doesn't matter that it's a secret. Another thing is that in general, these groups, they suffer from groupthink, they suffer from political biases. People who choose to spend their life in an intelligence agency are usually not your typical unbiased person. They would be mostly patriotic. They would be exposed to information that is mostly about we good, them bad. So in general, I have little appreciation for intelligence agency. I mean, I don't know if that's convincing. No. That's a lot of experience. I can go into more examples, but that's my experience. Something that Eric said before that was important. What was the previous question about? That was important. Forgot. Never mind. I remember. Okay.
Do you want me to go over what I said to you before?
No. I remember it's about how to trust the numbers, and I had something to say about it, but never mind.
Should I ask Peter a question while you're thinking about that?
I don't know if it will come back to me or not.
Okay.
I can talk about some of this stuff too. I have thoughts about
please. Go ahead.
Analysis. I mean, Sar keeps saying that this is steel manning the cases, but for every one of these points, I can come up with a reason why it's about 100%, why each of these happen, or close to 100%. I mean, that would be steel manning it. I actually have some slides going over each of these. I don't want to waste all my time going over them, but if this is important, or if we extend this to the extra 30 minutes or whatever, I can do that. What I really see is like coming up with every reason possible not to believe this case and not adding similar factors for the lab. Because if I wrote out a similar analysis for the lab, I'd have to put a factor on like, okay, this employee got infected, but they didn't infect any other coworkers. And they didn't infect any other place. And then they made it seamlessly across town. And I think you can make any of these analyses support what you want if you just add enough factors of 2. And I'll probably do this in the second debate.
Yep, which is the whole reason why this is not like some ultra sophisticated way of estimating anything. At the end of the day, you're still getting back to fundamentally the same problems, which is how can we estimate the probability of any given individual thing? That's really the challenging issue, especially in such a complicated, sophisticated, real-world example, right? What are the chances of somebody leaving a lab and going to one place and infecting us? Just that question alone might be literally unanswerable, right? You would have to create potentially a huge range of values there.
Honestly, because I think there's a bunch of ways in which I don't think the virus looks engineered, and I can say, why would they do this? Why would they do that? Why would they put this amino acid in? And if you put enough of those in, I'm down to like 1 in a billion odds that they made this particular virus, or I'll give an exact number in the next debate. So I think this is a very fragile method of coming up with the truth, because it's entirely sensitive on these, factors of 2 or other approximate numbers and the number that you add. I'd also add that he was talking about groupthink. The 3 other Bayesian analyses, I'll actually go over all of those in the third debate. These are all like drastic community. There's a huge amount of groupthink because you get status in this community for contributing to the lab leak theory, and you have to make the same kind of analysis.
Thank you. True.
I'm sure there's all kinds of published papers saying that this is not the most likely outcome, even though there's a few people in this community that all say the same thing.
So I am prepared to...
This debate reeks of scientism. The biggest issue that I have, this is the big issue that I had with like fucking... Hello? Mila? That fucking cat is up to no good. I hear her being up to no good. Sorry. The issue that I had with like the tech bro takeover of American politics and the technocracy is like I assumed that the issues with the technocracy are that you're over selecting for a certain type of person, and a certain type of person might miss some biases in due to their background or whatever, right? So maybe we have a government ran by all really smart 130 IQ people who are super good at data analysis and all that, but maybe they just forget that like, oh, we came from privileged families, so we're discounting some way to do public hygiene or sanitation, or we assume everybody would use like this type of soap, or like something like that. That would be my assumption. Like those would have been the problems with the technocracy. I didn't realize, or I never thought, I guess, the problem with the technocracy is that all of the technocrats are actually just fucking retarded, are like below high school level stats class intelligence when it comes to estimation, or when it comes to sampling data, or when it comes to drawing a valid inference or something. That would have never been my guess, right? Like this is retarded. This is not smart people who might overestimate something given like a privileged background or some non-representative demographic background. This is a person who couldn't pass a high school presentation on choosing valid data to base an inference on. Like they would fail this. In my opinion, in a good high school, they would fail this. The teacher would say, hey, why did you choose those numbers? And then when you wouldn't be able to articulate that, you would flunk the class. So I don't understand what the fuck. I don't know what the fuck this is. I don't know what's happened.
Be skeptical of specific numbers that are going into this calculation. But I am interested, Peter, if you have a critique of the method, of the overall technique, I'll be looking forward to any critiques you have to make.
Of the specific?
The overall technique is fine, but the overall technique is not, it's not doing anything profound or new. Like Bayesian, whatever inferencing has been, I don't know when the fuck Bayes theorem first came out, actually. Bayes theorem, Wikipedia. And even before, by the way, Bayes theorem, I'm sure people had ways, holy fuck, what a loser. 1763, is this an old fuck? Damn. This guy's some Dark Ages motherfucker. Working by candlelight. Okay, this is not, I take a whole bunch of events, I assign them a probability, and then I multiply them together. There's not, yes, that's not a profound, that's not like a profound addition to reasoning things out, like.
Once.
So when I asked Sarah about, what did you call probabilistic inference? Is this a good technique? I'd like to hear critiques of this technique if you have them, Peter.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of,
maybe on a future date if you're low on time.
a lot of the things he's saying can apply to his own work. I was writing some of these down while he's going. Other than the Steelman thing, he talked about like trapped priors and how he was saying people latch onto zoonosis. I don't think that's true at all, because you can look at 2020 polls, and about half of people, a little less, maybe 40%, I can look up a poll, thought it was a lab leak before we even had all this evidence, all this diffuse grant. Because that's just, I was trying to demonstrate this earlier when I said, look at all these other lab leak theories. It's a normal human tendency to want to blame humans for things that go wrong in the world. And so then there's a trapped prior where you latch onto that and you look for any reason why you're correct that it's the lab. I mean, there's other like when he went over the paper and said these 4 authors are motivated, there were, I forget, 20 authors, and he picked the 4 that were the proximal origin guys, but he also could have picked Michael Warby, who suspected lab leak and really tried to disprove it. He could have picked Marianne Koopmans, who was on the WHO team, and even after the WHO investigation, she thought maybe there were outbreaks before the market because the data was inconclusive, and there was that December 8th case and stuff like that. So there's lots of other non-motivated authors. We don't even know if these first 4 are motivated. You could also talk about, like, did you read the Christian Anderson Slack messages, sir?
Not all of them, some.
Okay, so Christian at one point mentions what his priors are in there. And so he says it's a 50% odds if you count its location Wuhan and there's a foreign cleavage site in it. I think those are the things. It's 50-50 lab leak. And so if that was his rational prior at that point, like, it looks engineered and it's in Wuhan, but then you add the market evidence on top of that, and also the evidence he's done into, like, the backbone isn't a known backbone, and the foreign cleavage site is out of frame, and there's a proline and an alanine and all these weird engineering choices, you can see how he's not lying. He just started 50-50, and then he found evidence that dropped his prior to, a much lower value. Yield.
But they did say at certain times that they don't know how this could not be engineered. So maybe it's okay that they learned how it is, but saying internally that this looks very suspicious and then ridiculing outside people who say the same.
What a non-responsive thing. It has to be. I got to talk to this guy. Does he feel? I don't understand. Does he feel like this is not an equal conversation, right? Like, this is like me arguing on whether or not is a GTX 5090 better than an 8800 GTX graphics card, which is like 20 years old. This is like me arguing this with a person who doesn't know the difference between an iPad and a computer, or like a CPU and an email inbox, and like pretending that it's a serious conversation. This is not a serious. This is just not a serious conversation. I don't understand how this is even. I don't understand what is happening here.
It's problematic. That's all I'm saying.
Listen to what he's just saying, right? This guy, it's funny because I run into the same issue where people are like, oh, he's an Israeli simp. Like, you can literally go back to the beginning of all my research and you can see me go through this conflict, this war, this book, this person, this speech, this battle, this war, these people, these events, you could watch my reasoning and everything, my understanding evolve throughout literally an entire fucking year, from debate to debate, from debate to debate, from person to person, from video to video, like, all of it is there. And then it's like, well, yeah, true, but Israel, Mossad agent. And it's like, that's not a real response, right? This guy said his prior started with 50-50, and then he went through this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing and this, and then it dropped it. And then this guy's response is, well, there's still that one email where he said it looks weird. Ironically, he's falling into, somebody linked this fucking video and they're like, you're gonna need this later. And I guess here we are. He's literally falling into this trap. And also keep in mind how disappointing for a person who's claimed to create a system of reasoning to specifically avoid these traps. He literally just fell into one of the first traps that he names, which is overweighting some evidence and discounting evidence that's not convenient. Because that guy just gave like 6 pieces of discovery for why the guy changed his opinion. He's like, true, but isn't this one thing kind of weird? He's literally this trap.
This chapter does not involve the facts of the JFK assassination, but it's important to establish a mode of reasoning that will become extremely relevant as we get into the facts. It's epistemology, if you will. Basically, how do we know that something happened, and how do we judge the relevance of individual facts in the context of a broader story? So let's take this exercise. Suppose that a bank is robbed at midday in the downtown of a major city. The robber does not wear a mask. He walks up to the counter, points a gun at the teller, and demands all the cash in a bag. The teller gives him a canvas bag full of $10,000 in cash, but slips a dye bomb inside the bag. The robber walks out, and his face is clearly caught on a security camera. 30 minutes after the robbery, a man named Jake is arrested across town. In his car, he has a bunch of cash totaling $9,000, which is the bills are stained with purple dye. His hands are stained with purple dye. He's wearing different clothes than what the robber was wearing, but he matches the description perfectly. 10 witnesses identified Jake in various lineups as the bank robber. A gun is found in Jake's car, matching the one used in the robbery. It's registered to him, and it has his fingerprints on it. So as straightforward as this story is, suppose there are a couple of odd discrepancies. Let's call these the odd facts. First, neither the canvas bag, presumably stained with the purple dye, nor the other $1,000 is ever found. Second, a friend of Jake's insists that he saw Jake at a bar across town at the exact moment that the robbery was taking place. Third, the place where Jake was apprehended is unusually far from the bank in terms of the amount of distance that he could have covered in noontime traffic. And fourth, we don't know how he changed clothes. So suppose all of this evidence is presented at a trial. The prosecution presents the money, the dye, the fingerprints, the gun, the security camera footage, the 10 eyewitnesses, and Jake's girlfriend, who testifies that he told her the night before that he was planning to rob a bank. And the defense puts on the odd facts. So what logical inference do we draw from the totality of the evidence? Well, clearly, the prosecution's facts demonstrate that Jake robbed the bank. The evidence is absolutely overwhelming. The money, the dye, the fingerprints, the gun, the eyewitnesses, the security camera, Jake's girlfriend. Jake robbed the bank. We can be extremely confident of that conclusion. Now, here's the key point. Once we decide, and we're justified in deciding that Jake robbed the bank, the odd facts, however they got to be that way, have to line up with the conclusion that we know to be true. What happened to the canvas bag or the other $1,000 that was never found? We don't know, but whatever happened to it, by definition, cannot alter the conclusion that Jake robbed the bank. In fact, what happened to the canvas bag, by definition, can't be a very important fact. It might be interesting to know, but it can't be that important because it can't affect the outcome. So what about that eyewitness who said that he saw Jake at the bar? Well, the existence of this story must be consistent with what we already know to be true. The witness may be lying, that would be consistent with what we know to be true. He might also be telling the truth. He might have seen a person who looked like Jake, or Jake might really have been there, but the witness got the time wrong, or he might honestly have wanted Jake to be not guilty so bad that he talked himself into believing that he was there. Whatever the explanation for this odd fact, even if it's an unusual or exotic explanation for why the witness testified as he did, it has to be consistent with what we already know to be true. Now, it would be a different story if there was stronger evidence that Jake really was at the bar and that his friend really did see him. If 10 people saw him there, for example, if there was a credit card receipt proving that he bought a drink at the exact moment that the bank was being robbed, that would be different. But if that was the case, how could the rest of the evidence that he was robbing the bank at that moment be so strong? Now take that other odd fact that Jake seems to have gotten unusually far away from the bank in the 30 minutes before the police caught up to him. Now, it might be out of line.
Like, you can't just take a couple things and be like, well, that's kind of sus. You don't think that's kind of sus. You think it's dispositive. You think it's proving. He thinks that that email of him saying, oh, this is whatever, that proves his case. And it's not even strong evidence towards anything. It's almost nothing. Because we can very easily think of a million reasons why he might have said, oh, like giving this piece of information to this journalist might be bad, right? It could be that he thinks that the journalist won't interpret it correctly. And a lot of scientific reporting isn't interpreted correctly. It could be that he thinks that it's not very relevant. Maybe at that point he didn't think it was very relevant. It could be that, like, there's a million reasons why he might not do it. Why would you instantly assume this must be proof that he's lying about everything and then discard all of the other evidence?
Much lower value.
But they did say at certain times that they don't know how this could not be engineered. So maybe it's okay that they learned how it is, but saying internally that this looks very suspicious and then ridiculing outside people who say the same is problematic.
Also, to be clear, his emails didn't show that, but
that's all I'm saying.
I don't know. I mean, I say things privately that I don't say publicly in terms of all kinds of things. I was, the thing about the Nancy Pelosi, Paul Pelosi attack thing.
I say things privately that I don't say publicly. Careful, buddy.
I never publicly. Bruh. That thing that came up in the news where, was he attacked by an outsider or was that his friend? Something like that. I had to look at the details. I initially suspected, who knows, maybe that's true. But I didn't go on Twitter saying, this is what I think. And there's things that you say because they're socially acceptable, and there's also things you wonder about just because, who knows, this is a weird thing, I'm going to look at it briefly. And if you're a scientist and you know what horrible consequences are going to come if you come out immediately saying,
oh, there you go.
A lab leak, maybe you're going to do the 2 weeks of investigation that they did to actually prove that it's not a lab leak before you make those explosive claims.
I understand, but still, it's not about having secrets. It's about you don't ridicule other people for thinking what you thought initially. You can say,
what is he even arguing at this point? Is he just ass mad?
oh yeah, that is a very interesting possibility. Here's why we thought it initially, but changed our mind. But I don't think this is a very important.
And to be clear,
point.
I thought it was true. I thought it was 50-50 for a long time, and I'm not ridiculing anyone that believes this because it confused me. And half the world is confused. But I think they're confused because there's a lot of bad actors pushing bad theories about this. There's a lot of motivated reasoning. There's a lot of outright lies, like the making up the three
Still not. Okay. I don't.
Shall we move on?
Sure.
So just a few responses. So the thing I forgot to say before is I agree that the probabilistic inference this is tough to chew. It's new. I don't expect it to be immediately convincing. In the last session, I will take all of the probabilistic stuff and turn it into something intuitive. Okay, so you don't have to rely on this alone. This is not the only claim I'll be making. I will turn it into something intuitive. But the idea is once you go through the probabilistic inference process, then you can turn it correctly into something intuitive. And I think in general, to understand what we're doing, when you do probabilistic inference, the question you're trying to answer is which hypothesis is based on things happening that are more rare. Okay, the hypothesis that says in order for us to be correct, the things that need to happen don't occur frequently in the past is the lower probability one. That's basically all this is about. It's about being able to deduct from the past to the present.
Somebody should just ask him, what's interesting what you're saying here in like Bayes' theorem or whatever? What can you give me like one difference? What is newer or what unique novel idea have you presented to us?
And doing it in a way that is as much as possible free from biases and fallacies. So after we do the whole probabilistic analysis, I can then convert it into this intuitive framework, and I think it will be much clearer at that point. Just two comments about things Peter said about trapped prior. I want to be clear. Everyone has trapped prior. So the fact that the lab leak is the correct result does not mean that people that claim lab leak are doing it correctly. They're doing it for the wrong reasons. So everyone uses trapped prior. Everyone has this problem. This is not only the wrong people making mistakes. Everyone is making the mistakes, and then sometimes people happen to be on the right side. So I'm not trying to claim that lab leak proponents are free from biases, mistake, or anything like that. The rest is not important.
Okay, I've asked a lot of questions. I still have no shortage of questions. Will, if you want to put in a few, also, I can either start skipping questions for Peter, or we can extend the time.
I'm open to.
Let's get to the point where it's 0 and then decide.
I would like to ask one for Sar here on the kind of general. I think one of the difficulties is there are competing methods of coming to these conclusions. Like, I think I can articulate all of Peter's claims in a probabilistic inference fashion. Like, I don't think there's any. I think you all are not disagreeing on that being a reasonable method. The question is what gets included and what gets excluded there.
Yes.
In terms of the calculations.
Yes.
I'd like to have, one of the perhaps easy biases is to believe the zoonosis, because I can, as you said before, I can come to a kind of an intuitive picture of how that works. It passes from a bat to something. I can see the person, taking the train going to the Wuhan market. I kind of focused some of my questions on your proposal about trying to build for myself a similarly intuitive and simple picture of how it might work in, in your model. And I think you kind of wanted to say, like, we don't take a position on how it might have happened, whether or not it's, left via, or whether there was an environmental exposure that led to a lab leak, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the backdrop of this question. What I want to ask is, what has to be true about the activities that were going on at WIV to make the production of the SARS-CoV-2 probable? So you cited.
Oh, this is my question earlier, but this is a much softer version of it. My question earlier is like, what research are they doing specifically here? What are they doing in other labs? What is happening that's allowing you to assign the probability you've assigned? Now, I think he's just asking for a singular story or narrative, maybe, but.
A statistic that said it was, Dr. Barrick says it's $6,000 to create a novel virus. The diffuse proposal doesn't get funded.
Yep.
How many viruses did they have to make? What did they have to do such that one like this leaked? Give me a little bit more about how you think that occurred.
Okay, so first of all, I think that's a great question to ask Yuri. Next session,
Okay.
he will be able to do it much better from memory.
Oh my
but
God.
basically, we already know they collected and sequenced many viruses in nature. So they already have that in the database. So going ahead and trying to...
Well, careful, because the SARS-CoV-2 backbone was not in any database. That's not the case. Now, he might just be saying in general they had other ones in the database.
trying to find the ones with the best ACE2 binding, that's not a big deal. That's something that they can do. They already have what they need.
But they aren't using a predicted ACE2 binding. There were differences, so that's not the case.
Yeah, it costs money, of course, but that's what they do. That's their job. And basically, what I have here is these are basically the
So none of the underlying things that he just said were true. I don't know if he has any knowledge on the actual research or what's going on here, but
activities that will result in SARS-2.
But I guess that's why he's bringing that Yuri guy to do the second part of the debate.
So I guess that makes sense, but I'm thinking kind of
But he was asking like more broadly, yeah, like what's going on in this lab to make any of this even possible? Like, what are they like spraying in a can? Are they like spraying the virus around in a can, or like what the fuck is happening here?
I'm trying to constrain, or I'm trying to build a picture of how surprised should I be? Like, okay, so let's say that WIV had $10 billion and they were doing Golden Gate assemblies and mixing every spike and every ACE2 together. I would not be particularly surprised that they came up with a very infectious virus. It doesn't bear on the question of whether it leaked, but I wouldn't be surprised about that. But given that their grant wasn't funded, and we agree that it's fairly expensive to do this, and given my knowledge of how researchers operate, where, you can get some stuff done without a grant, but you can't get a large genetic engineering project, give me a scenario or give me a constraint.
Now he's got I think this guy in particular has the biology background, so he's going to know more than I would. I don't know how particular his background was. The idea of just randomly discovering new ways for a thing to be infectious, my understanding is that's actually incredibly complicated. Like when we think of like protein folding, I think we think of like a thing that's like this, but like maybe it folds like this. But like, not only is this in 3 dimensions, which makes it even more weird, these things are insanely fucking long, thousands or tens of thousands or more than that, like chains of amino acids long. Every time they fold, it could change theoretically the function based on like a new orientation. Like this stuff is really insanely complicated. I don't know if you can just throw a bunch of stuff together and just come up with randomly new, insanely infectious things, but
or reject the idea that I can constrain the analysis in that way. It just seems like they would have to spend a bunch of money to produce this thing. They didn't get their grant funded. It seems like that would go against the probability that this was actually, mix and match golden gate assembly if something happens.
Okay, right. So first of all, the important thing is that we know there are bad viruses in nature with RBD similar to SARS-2. So we know those exist with this level of ACE2 match.
SARS-CoV-2 already binded to ACE2 as well, or SARS-CoV. The original one did. I don't know if I think he's just unaware of this, but I don't think he has an underlying understanding of any of the molecular biology or virology or whatever. Like even basic level stuff, right? Like I learned all this just reading the 1 3-page paper. I don't know how he doesn't, or he's unaware of this.
So it's all about whether in the 180 viruses they sequence, whether it's there or not. Okay, once they're there, then how costly it is to find it. You can start with simulations. That could be cheap, and then you go in vitro. So,
but the simulations argument also doesn't work because the new binding that was created by SARS-CoV-2 wasn't predicted with computer simulations, at least according to every scientist that's talked about it, right?
Don't know exactly how much this will cost. We can look into it. It's very probable that they took the same proposal and gave it to the Chinese government and got it funded. I don't know.
But we have no evidence of that at all?
But we do know that people are there doing their job, and we do know that is the kind of stuff that they find interesting in 2019.
The kind of stuff? Like, this is a serious debate. $100,000. This is the kind of stuff they do?
So, yeah, I expect this could happen. I mean, not 100%, but 1.2% per year. Sure.
Okay, so that I understand what you're saying. One more.
Like, come on. He's being so generous. Like, so many of the points in here are just stupid. Despite diffuse rejection, WIV started a similar project. How do you know that? What is the similar project? This was rejected, so why are you even adding this in here? This involves screening for human ACE2 match. Given Banal52 is identical to SARS-2 in that aspect, and WIV had 180 unpublished viruses, it's likely they would find a good match. Remember, SARS-CoV-1 binded to H2. Binded to ACE2. They would then need to optimize it for human infection, e.g. adding an FCS for cleavage site. Okay. Given that the work done was BSL2, a lab worker infection is quite likely. But we've already seen that based on our own stuff, our own guidelines, that SARS-CoV-2 research can happen in a BSL2 lab. So this assumption is not true. So like the underlying assumptions like have these points are just completely fucking false. And then from this we calculate a 1.2% per year likelihood of a pandemic level virus escaping from every single type of lab. Like it's just like,
to sharpen it, I guess, even more, it seems like that explanation relies on one of those, that the SARS-CoV-2 being a direct chimera, or it seems like the probability is highest under that explanation that it's direct chimera. So if that's not true, but would you agree that the more intermediate steps are required, the more there has to be a funding source, the more there should be some sort of paper trail, something like that? Like what I'm trying to get you to do is to constrain how much of a project this had to be.
After seeing Peter's presentation, what percentage would you give for it being a lab leak? Well, after that, I'm highly confident that I can argue this against basically anybody on the planet that I've seen argue this so far. There might be some specialists that I wouldn't know, but any of like the pop science dipshits, like any of the Weinsteins or anybody on Joe Rogan. But there might be some like specialist people that argue this conspiracy that might have points that I'm not aware of. Like we're gonna have to watch other shows or other things to see what the best arguments are for lab leak, because my guess is this guy on the bottom right doesn't even know them. Or maybe the Yuri guy in the next set of arguments, maybe he'll have in the next video, maybe he'll have good arguments. This guy right here hasn't given us a single point to even contend with. But like given absolutely zero facts and given zero prep, I could devise a better counter argument to what Peter has said here than what this guy on the bottom right said. This is just an unbelievably crazy debate to me. I can't believe this.
Right. So currently, so we don't know if it's a chimera or not. Probably not. But basically, what we know is if you take Banal52, a virus that exists in nature, and put an FCS in it, you're pretty much at SARS-2. That is not a lot of steps. So this is a virus that exists in nature. You just plug in the FCS as it is now, and you're done. You don't need to.
What? But that's just not true. Nothing has been found that matches it at that level. Like none of those viruses have been found or cataloged anywhere in the world.
Do anything else. This becomes infectious. The lab worker gets it under BSL2, and that's it. So there's not that much genetic engineering going on here.
Okay.
I think this is for Yuri much better. Keep it for the next session.
Okay.
Totally, yeah. Go ahead, Aaron.
Okay, the last few of my starred questions for Sar. Now, in Peter's presentation, he not just gave a critique of the lab leak theory, but he also critiqued the credibility of some of the people putting forth the lab leak theory. So on the one hand, you don't want to be in the company of Steve Bannon and Rudy Giuliani. This is not good company. But on the other hand, what does it matter what other people are saying? What matters is what you're saying, right? I want to know, do you feel like you need to respond to Peter's criticism of other lab leak theories, of other proponents of lab leak theory? Do you feel like you're in bad company? Do you feel like your word stands strength on its own?
Right. So of course, we propose a specific hypothesis, which is the Steelman of the lab leak position. We compare it to the Steelman of the zoonosis position. We don't care what anyone else says. We have been in many cases supporting people that are very fringe. It's just the way the world is. So truth is hard. It's not always with the people you like. Sometimes the people you don't like got it. And again, it's all by chance. I mean, everyone is using bad inference. So it's not that there's no good reason why this happens one time that way and another time the other way. We don't care what people say. We don't use that. Maybe
Find me this guy's Twitter. I'm just curious. Was he an ardent Trump supporter or a reluctant Trump supporter? Or was this guy actually a supporter for Kamala? I don't know if he's American or not, but even so, everybody has an opinion on it. Just curious. Just as a philosophical exercise or just pure curiosity.
if I'll have a few minutes left that I need to just talk freely, then I can go through my my responses to Peter's deck, and you can see like we have this happening all the time. Human inference signal. Like whenever the claim is about some people say something, that's fine. We don't. It's not something that affects the probability of the hypothesis.
Okay, wait.
People will say weird things always.
Let me jump in there. So I saw these in the human inference ignored, but what struck me is, and I think this gets to one of Peter's questions, is you rely on the 1977, the Russian flu, the H1N1 Russian flu, as a evidence or as your prior for flus. That seems totally human inference based. It seems like I found competing theories about what caused that. You say lab leak, but that seems totally human inference. Like how do you not have to be accountable for that?
Good point. I agree. Yeah, so eventually at the bottom level, you need to use human inference.
Oh my God, why would you admit this? This is the whole point I feel like that's the whole meme. The joke goes that you do Bayesian reasoning by doing normal reasoning while muttering, Bayes, 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 under your breath. Like...
Good point, I agree. Yeah, so eventually at the bottom level, you need to use human inference. The whole idea of this process is to break down the very intractable questions into smaller pieces where human inference is generally not that bad.
What? Oh, so a small question like, was this whole thing lab leak or not? Oh, okay.
If whether we should have counted 1977 maybe as a half case instead of one case, that could have been a mistake, and we should fix that. I'm sure there are other mistakes. I'm sure there are places where we were too conservative and we need to bring the numbers up. The idea is that you give this leeway both sides and make sure that you leave room for all the mistakes, and eventually you get a number that is robust. Here it's important that we have, to this point, the prior plus the WIV activity in Wuhan. We have two different methods that reach very similar numbers, and I think, maybe I'll stand corrected, but I think they don't look very biased or motivated. I'm sure Peter will be able to show where I'm wrong here, but I think these are two methods that are generally balanced, Steelman both sides. But yeah, let's see. Maybe I'm wrong.
Okay.
I can respond right now if
go ahead.
if you want. I need to share my slides out. Is that up? Yeah. So I thought this. My mic's on, yeah. So the calculation on the left isn't bad. It does miss two human coronavirus that haven't since SARS-2, but that's not huge. I think the Wuhan might be a little higher than 1.5. The lab leak rate, I looked this up in a few papers. They said about 1 in 500 per lab per year. Maybe you can make that higher if you think the WIV is unsafe, but I don't think you're going to make 100 times higher. But maybe, you need to have proof of that claim. I think the odds they have a secret starting virus are much lower than that. I don't actually know where this 180 unpublished viruses come from. We need to talk about this. Diffuse, as written, couldn't make SARS-2. I found a video clip of Yuri Daigan even agreeing with this. He says you have to go beyond what's written in the...
Oh, because in the diffuse paper or in the grant proposal, they explicitly were only studying... I don't remember if it was about adding a furin cleavage site or if it was something to do with the RBD or whatever, but they were only talking about taking a bat thing and then putting it in mice and then studying transmissibility that way. It didn't actually involve any human related research. So the diffuse thing wouldn't have gone far enough. You would need to go further.
fuse grant to create SARS-CoV-2 because it's done in an abnormal backbone. And there's also these other things.
Oh yeah, and the backbone they were using, so like the virus they start with before they add stuff to it, before they come on it, these are already catalog backbones. They already know what these are.
Like the foreign cleavage site doesn't look natural. It's hard to find a way to culture it successfully. And so yeah, the 15% seems way too high, and the 50% seems way too high. And there's a bunch of other factors you can add in this, and also pandemic starting in Wuhan, that's like 30% versus 40%, but that's not a big deal. But I think there's a lot we can argue about here that you're missing. Yield.
Okay, I'll give a quick response. So 1 in 500 is the general studies about generally lab leak, those that are found. Here we're talking about the situation where we already went through the steps and we have SARS-2, and we have someone working on it on SARS-2. I can easily say that why this is close to 100% infection, but I think 15% is pretty conservative. So this is a very different case compared to the general background of people working with viruses. These are people working with an extremely contagious virus in a very bad condition, specifically not protecting their respiratory tract. And about the FCS backbone, all that's discussed in the next session. These are evidence that are not in the model at that point. So maybe they increase, maybe they decrease. This is just evidence up at that point.
That was actually going to be exactly my question, which is, I understand not protecting the respiratory tract is a bad idea, but what lab procedures would be aerosolizing or getting the virus into the air?
Oh shit! Nice. That was another one of my questions. What does he think they're just like in a perfume can, just spraying this around the lab? Yes, this is a specific question that I would have asked. That I would have said would be more brutal. I would be shocked if the guy in the bottom right knows any of these lab procedures at all.
I imagine most people are working with the virus in like bulk liquid or not in. I don't see how the virus gets into the air to breathe in. I want to understand how that happens.
So one
Question for
thing they
Yuri.
describe is working with is infecting animals with the viruses they produce. So that's a very easy way to get it. I'm not.
I want to understand how that happens.
So one thing they describe is working with is infecting animals with the viruses they produce. So that's
So what, do they suck the animals off, or do they make out with the animals, or do they sleep with the animals, or do they have the animals do cough tests in each other's faces, or?
very easy way to get it. I don't know enough about
There you
other
go.
procedures. Yuri
That should have been the first answer. I don't know. I have no fucking idea.
could probably give you a good sense.
I think that's unfortunately easy. I think it is.
Okay.
Having stuck myself with a couple of needles and with a couple of pathogens. Having
A good sense.
I think that's unfortunately easy. I think it is.
Okay.
Having stuck myself with a couple of needles and with a couple of pathogens.
My guess would be that it's not super easy at all. If it was, my guess is my intuition would be that we would see way more contamination events leaking from labs constantly, would be my guess. I don't know how much research you're doing under a microscope where you're sticking yourself with needles constantly, unless he's talking about like recreational drug use. But I mean, I don't know. I've never worked in any of these labs before, so who knows?
Okay, I guess related to that, I recall in your analysis R, you gave the factor of 4x for the BSL2, which I sort of quibbled with a little bit at the time. I think I can better explain my quibble now, which is, are you saying that other viruses are getting studied in greater safety? Is that what that's representing? Because your prior probability that a release, that a pandemic is caused by a lab leak already takes into account the general safety that people works with viruses in labs. So if they worked with SARS-CoV-2 with biosafety level 2, but they work with everything else also with biosafety level 2, then shouldn't that already be accounted?
Wait, I'm sorry, real quick. This is interesting. That Peter guy brings this up. I started to believe the lab leak theory in 2020, or at least I thought the odds were 50% or better it was true. I certainly didn't know a thing about H5N1 gain-of-function research before the pandemic. I can tell you exactly how I came to believe in the lab leak theory. This is Peter Miller, bottom left guy right now. I was, like many white male tech bros, kind of annoyed by wokeness, so I had gravitated into an entertaining media ecosystem that agreed with me on that issue. Various IDW podcasts. Oof, sorry, hiccup. The intellectual dark web. And then those people, starting with Brett Weinstein, started suddenly selling pandemic conspiracy theories, so I thought they were credible. It took a few years for me to learn enough about virology to understand why the lab leak theory is very unlikely to be true. I'm sure that the same thing happens for people that get their news from right-wing sources, and the same thing probably also happens if you get news from the New York Times, and one of their journalists falls for a lab leak conspiracy theory. So I think this is largely just about right-wing politicians lying to the public, entertainers spreading conspiracy theories, and credulous journalists boosting their theories over and over again for clicks. Look, the resonance. See that resonance? The resonance. There it is.
So it's a good point that the priors discourse
More memes, LeMayo. What? But I know people who've fallen for conspiracy theories, and this is just never the reason. Wait, what is this? I can't entirely disagree because I've previously written similar things about people losing trust in the news. But I know people who've fallen for conspiracy theories, and this is just never the reason. Oh, I'm skeptical of anything I read in the New York Times or the Washington Post. When I ask why they're afraid of vaccines, it's never, I used to listen to scientists, but I lost trust. It's more like, I saw a YouTube video, I heard a podcast, I read it on Substack. True. Oh, he reacted to one of my clips. Maybe he does know who I am. Peterson thinks he's completely unknown if Nazis were left-wing or right-wing. He had a study planned that could have resolved it, but the damn woke mob stole his professorship before he could do it. I found a way to figure out what large language models think about this question. Oh, nice.
Describe situations which were probably less safe than normal. So that's a good point. But I think here we're talking about something that is far more extreme. So this is something that should probably be at least BSL-3, and it was a BSL-2. So remember that.
Like, how can you say that? I want to do a podcast on MMA and UFC. I need people. I just want to do a year's worth of episodes on MMA and UFC where I just say the most retarded shit with no, and I want to do it shirtless the whole time. Okay? You're gonna see my flabby, skinny, fat body out the entire time, and I wanna bring a bunch of other fucking out of shape, unfit, dipshit losers on, and we're just gonna talk for 3 hours analyzing UFC and MMA. Like, how can you say he just said he has no idea. He doesn't even know how a virus could escape a BSL-2 lab, and he's like, it should probably be BSL-3 instead of BSL-2. That's the equivalent of me walking into any major software company in the world and be like, why don't you guys do all of this in Python instead? I actually just read a really cool thing on Ruby on Rails. Why don't you use React Native to make Windows 12? Like, where does the confidence for these statements come from? Whatever the fuck BSL means, they're English characters and they're lab standards that exist all over the fucking world, okay? It's used in Chinese labs and American labs. So clearly there have been hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of people in these fields that have thought about whatever is the difference between BSL 2 and 3 and all these biosafety lab regulations. How could you say something? Where does the confidence come from to make these statements?
But I think here we're talking about something that is far more extreme. So this is something that should probably be at least BSL-3, and it was a BSL-2. So remember that SARS has escaped from BSL-3 and BSL-4, right? So these are tricky viruses. I think giving this factor makes sense. Try to maybe substantiate it harder.
So the four,
like, if the judges have already made up their minds, then fine. Okay, then ask whatever meme questions you want to be nice or whatever. But that can't be allowed to stand. You need to justify that, okay? For you to be claiming that you have such a highly mathematical model, you have to have more than just, well, it should probably be BSL-3. Bullshit. There needs to be a justification for that. Come on.
X represents increased probability of lab leak of this specific virus compared to a typical virus.
Yeah, no, not the typical virus, compared to virus that leaked in the past. So which those were also safety breaches, right? So it's not compared. Of course, SARS-2 and BSL-2 is probably 1,000 times worse than just what's happening now in any normal virology lab. So that's
but remember that a normal virology lab literally hosts SARS-CoV-2, the actual virus right now that leaked, not whatever precursor, not whatever other precursor is the wrong word, not any other SARS type or MERS or any other viruses, but the current BSL-2 facilities will host and study and work with SARS-CoV-2. So, but maybe he just knows more than everybody else.
That's crazy. But compared to
that's crazy.
Compared to
that's crazy.
It's probably 1,000 times worse than just a particular virus compared to virus that leaked in the past. So which those were also safety breaches, right? So it's not compared. Of course, SARS-2 and BSL-2 is probably 1,000 times worse than just what's happening now in any normal virology lab. So that's crazy. But compared to
that's crazy. Me asking some fucking, Microsoft programmer, what language do you guys use? And the guy's like, oh, well, we use these frameworks and these. And it's like, really? That's crazy. It's like, who the fuck are you to say that's? What the fuck do you know about anything to even say that? How would you even know that's crazy? You don't even know what they're talking about. Does he even know what BSL stands for?
Compared to press lab leaks, okay, so 4x and 2x consecutively.
Hi, baby.
Okay, I'm down to pretty much my small questions. So, Will, if you have anything else you wanted to do before we run out of time.
I have one kind of high-level question, which I pose to both of you, which is, and you can refuse to answer, but I think I want to know what the most important 3 claims you think you need to win are, so I can understand where I'm thinking about the evidence as presented versus where you all are thinking about the evidence as presented. And perhaps this is something that occurs at the next debate, or we need to extend time, but I'd like to understand what you think the 3 most important claims are for each of you that you need to win. If you have questions that need to take precedence, Eric, that's fine.
I'd like more time for that, or save that for next debate.
I can give some idea. So I think we are not that far. I think not that far in priors. So if it's 20% or 8%, it's fine. We're not that far about Wuhan as a location. It's also fine. I think the important points would be our claim that the market, with all the evidence around it, makes it an unlikely patient zero location. That's something that's probably important to determine. We will probably be a big issue about whether the foreign cleavage site insertion is natural or not. That is something that is, I think it's like very, very strong evidence. We're putting it, it's something pretty conservative, but it could easily be 1000x evidence. What else could be important?
And
If you look at BSL safety levels, the level for studying COVID-19 is BSL-3, not BSL. Oh, you're a troll. That's a troll account. I don't know what you mean when you say study COVID-19. That's a disease.
most interested in just this debate, Sar.
Oh, for this one, yeah, the market I think is the only thing that's
Good
really...
troll. You got me. I'm trolled. You got me. You did. You trolled me. You got me.
Yeah, priors probably we can improve a bit, but I don't think we're that far apart, and the location pretty similar. So, yeah, the market is the big thing. Whether our claim that the evidence of the market is so problematic that it's better to just assume that it's a coincidence than an animal.
Will, do you want to finish any other questions you have, and then I'll just use the rest of the time? Okay.
All you.
So I got 2 minutes, Peter.
Can I use my 2 for some closing statements, or are we? I think you should decide now for extending, because otherwise I'm going to want to use my time differently.
I'd be happy to talk about like a 15-minute each extension. How do you feel, sir?
It's 3 a.m. already. That's the
Okay.
10 minute.
He does not want to be. It's 3 a.m. It's just a $100,000 debate. Now to him, that's not a lot of money. So
We'll have other times to talk.
Yeah,
so,
that's the 10 minutes
I mean, okay. Sorry, 10 minutes total or 10 minutes each?
each.
Okay.
okay.
And maybe we won't use it. Hopefully, I'll try to go quickly. So, Peter, I got a few sort of related questions. I'll just give it all.
My time already. No, never mind. Ask me your question.
Okay. So, I want to talk about the significance of the
What
most
did they say?
recent.
Joe?
Time already.
So, Peter, I got a few sort of related questions. I'll just give it all.
My time already. No, never mind. Ask me your question.
Wait, what was the joke? I didn't
So,
understand
I
it.
want to talk about.
No, never mind. Ask me your question.
Okay.
My time
I wanna-
already.
Timer wasn't ready. Is that what he said?
Never mind. Ask me your question.
Okay. So, I want to talk about the significance
Take your time with it.
to the most recent
Okay.
common ancestor. It's a moving target, literally, because as time goes on and different lines die out, the most recent common ancestor gets bumped up further and further. So there's a few points where I'm unclear. Are we talking about the most recent common ancestor of the cases that existed in Wuhan in early January? Are we talking about the most recent common ancestor of cases today? Are we talking about the first spillover? Is there a reason why? It seems to be that you're arguing that the market is both the first major cluster and where the spillover itself happened. Although
Wait, what? No, at some point you would just say that that there is no common ancestor, or that the common ancestor is unknown. You would have different clusters of viruses that seem to have, or viri, or whatever. Is viri the plural of viruses, or is viruses one of those weird words where the plural of virus is viruses? I don't think you're moving up unless I'm misunderstanding. I don't think you're moving up the common ancestor at all.
you don't seem 100% sure, but you think that's the most
I could be wrong.
likely explanation. So is there a reason we should be getting a cluster of cases where the spillover happened? And I'm going to round this out with one last thing, which is you're arguing the case, the evidence shows it's impossible that a September, say, origin happened because of the long time lag. And I'm not completely convinced that the evidence shows that decisively, because it seems unlikely to me that the virus was circulating at a very low level without going extinct and without creating any great outbreaks for 2 months, passing from person to person at a low level. But a pandemic is a really rare event. So I don't think it's, to me, completely out of the question that the process to get a pandemic involved some rare things that go along. Now, obviously, if the virus emerged in humans in September and was as contagious as it was in January, then yeah, I'm accepting that's impossible. But it's possible that the virus that first hit humans was much less contagious. It passed at a low level, miraculously didn't go extinct, but picked up some mutations that made it more contagious among humans. And this is independently of what we're talking about zoonotic or lab leak, that when it first passed into humans, it might have rapidly become more contagious. So that's sort of a bunch of related things, and I just want to know what thoughts you have about the relationship between when the spillover happened and when the first cluster showed up.
For some reason I'm having trouble sharing my screen again, so I do have some more slides for this, but we've seen a lot of slides already. Most recent common ancestor is a moving target. Like if you did it now, I think you would find like the Omicron first base would be the most common ancestor because everything else is, other than cryptic lineages, everything else is gone.
If other strains completely die out, you could have a most common recent ancestor. That's true. Okay, that makes sense. Because that's probably the most normal viral behavior, because more competitive strains would crowd out the other ones, so it would move up. That makes sense. You wouldn't have a whole bunch of separate lineages that are alive simultaneously.
It's quite stable until Omicron emerges. If you try it at any point between the market outbreak and then, you get the same result. And could you have cryptic transmission in Wuhan for 2 months? I can work out the exact odds for you based on these models. It's extremely unlikely, but it depends on your model. Can you have cryptic transmission elsewhere in China and then it suddenly hops to Wuhan on a train? Maybe. I haven't thought too heavily on that. We don't see like this rapid evolution once it jumps over into people, and we'll talk about that at the second debate. It seems, but also it doesn't rapidly evolve like when it spills over into mink or deer. So that's probably just like this generalist property of the virus that both allowed it to spill over, but also allowed it to not mutate that much. It did have some early adaptations actually, though. It had the D614G mutation that enhanced the furin cleavage site. That happened very quickly and had a great improvement in the efficacy.
Oh, wait. So now when people say
that enhanced some early adaptations actually, though. It had the D614G mutation.
D614G mutation. Oh, wait, I don't know what that means. Because I was going to say D, whatever the number, that's the amino acid, and then the location on the location in the RNA, but there's a G at the end, so I don't know what that means. Never mind, I have no idea what that is.
And that enhanced the furin cleavage site. That happened very quickly. And
oh, wait, the last letter is what the amino acid was replaced with due to mutation. Oh, okay. So D614G means that in the fully sequenced RNA strand, at position 614, there was a D amino acid, and now there's a G amino acid. Gotcha.
Had a great improvement in the efficacy of the virus. So that argues both against prolonged culturing of the virus in a lab and prolonged transmission of the virus in humans.
May I propose a scenario to you? Thanks, Will. Imagine that the virus that spilled over in September did not look like any of the early samples that we have today, and it spread with a very low but positive growth. And maybe it spread in multiple places in China, maybe it spread in multiple places in Wuhan. And then it happened to reach the market around the same time. It develops a very positive mutation that blew it up. I think you gave a doubling time of like every 3.5 days or a small number of days.
So that scenario is inconsistent with a lab leak, because if you're saying it has this furin cleavage site and this ACE2 binding, you're definitely, that virus is ready to go. So if the lab did do that, it's not going to circulate for 2 months.
I just want to understand if this is consistent with any explanation.
Could it have some natural explanation where it circulates widely and then it suddenly gains the furin cleavage site in the market? I'd have to think about that some more, but off the top of my head, I don't see why that's impossible. I don't see why that's more likely. But
what is when we say furin cleavage site, are we referring to the S1 part of the spike protein? Is that what we're talking about? That part that allows it to, that's the part that the furin protein, no, protease does the cutting? Yes. Okay. Jesus. All right.
Yeah. So this.
Oh, no, wait. Someone said that's the furin cleavage site is the boundary between S1 and S2. Wait, let me look this up again. Okay. And then when we say that it gets into the thing that binds it to the ACE2 stuff, that's just the S1 part of the protein. It just like bumps around and then matches and then nothing. And then once it gets in there, then this furin thing happens that cleaves it inside the cell and then makes it ejaculate into the cell. That's the S1, S2 thing is the furin acting on it. The S1 thing getting into the cell is just the receptor binding domain clicking with the ACE2 thing. That's just it, right? I think it was close enough. All right.
The ancestral virus will still exist. It just be rapidly outcompeted by the descendant virus, and then all evidence that the ancestral virus is lost, and then we're left here with, like, I guess it's...
So something important about Picard's simulations about the polytomies, the two basal polytomies, that's the pattern, which is where you have this root, so like your root's lineage B, and you have a bunch of mutations coming off of that root. And so you can tell what the most recent common ancestor is because it's the base of that polytomy. And so if it was actually, like lineage A and lineage B can both be the base, there's arguments for both, but like there's this other argument for ProCove2, which we're going to talk about in the second debate, where that's one mutation even further to the bad side, and I'm going to say that's a reversion, and they're going to say that's ancestral, and like that really can't easily be the most recent common ancestor, because if that was it, then the base of the polytomy would be ProCove2, not lineage B.
I don't know what any of that means.
Okay, let's see if I have any questions for Sarah that I've... something really quick. Sarah, do you disagree, or are you happy with the distinction that Peter made about a super spreading event versus a cluster? He said that this market was not a super spreading event, it was a cluster. Is this important to you? Do you have an opinion?
No, I think I agree. If I recall correctly, super spreading means that there's one person doing all the work. I don't think... was that the distinction, Peter? Whether it's one person or just the location?
I don't know if that factors into our models. It's definitely a slow burn through the market, not a super spreader, in my opinion. I guess we're in agreement on that. And
this is about how rapid it was? I have no idea. I didn't look into it.
It's not like one person from the lab goes into the mahjong room and then suddenly it's 60 cases. It's 1 week there's 3 and the next week there's 6.
Okay,
like that.
yeah.
And it's weird if that slow burn is happening at the market, but not anywhere else in Wuhan. That's why I think it's not a super spreader location. I think it's really weird that's the only place that slow burn's happening.
It sounds like there's not a disagreement anyhow. I just wanted to make sure you had a chance to say something in case you disagreed with what Peter was saying.
I'm not sure if this maybe I'm missing something. So yeah, it doesn't seem like the market has happened like with one person affecting 60 in one day. That doesn't seem to be the case. But definitely the market conditions created a higher exponent in the market. That's our hypothesis.
I don't see any disagreement between you there. Okay. Another thing for Sar, I think at one point around slide 49, you were critiquing certain papers that are against the lab leak theory, and I ahead of time I don't understand the significance of these papers, so I have a sort of a dual question here. One is, do you think that the accuracy of these papers is important to Peter's argument, and the other is, do you have critiques with the papers beyond critiques with the authors of the papers? Like, do you see specific problems with the papers, or you're just concerned about the author's method because the
You're talking about 39? 39? Let me share it.
I wrote down slide 49. Let me just look at it.
This?
Slide, I guess 47.
Oh, okay. So just to clarify, this is about furin cleavage sites being a focus of virology. I don't have any critique of these papers. This is just to show a pattern.
Slide 47?
This one?
Yes. So you mentioned these papers, and then you go on to give messages that the authors of these papers gave.
Yes.
And you're concerned about the accuracy of these papers. I'm wondering if you have concerns within the substance.
No, he just wanted to loosely connect some names to a fucking email, my dude. That's fucking hilarious that you think that he's going to have any substantive critique. He doesn't even understand the subject matter of the underlying papers. He's already said so many statements that contradict what was written in the proximal origins of SARS-CoV-2, right? That's the one. That's the one paper that we went over to learn a little bit we know.
Yes. So the substance is all of these things. This is lots of things that go against the paper.
The substance is what?
Yes. So the substance is all of these things.
All of these things. The 3 highlighted chat messages.
This is lots of things that go against the paper.
So that's this. Okay, I understand.
Yeah.
Oh my God! Why do they let them get away with this? People need to be humiliated. We need to bring back bullying. You should be humiliated when this happens, and it's good for you. I'm not being a pro-bully person, but there should be some shame attached to this. People need to earn their egos, okay? And people should feel embarrassed to show up with this level of confidence and to be this woefully and inadequately equipped for the conversation. I don't understand why we're so, where are my femcells at? Why do we baby men so much This is so unbelievable to me. It's not okay. You asked a specific question. Who are you? What is your degree? Do you have a fake degree? I'm not trying to trash the judge. I'm sorry, but like you asked him a very specific question. He circled a bunch of fucking names, okay, like a 3-year-old with a half-eaten Crayola crayon to imply that the underlying substance of either of these papers could be called into question. And then you specifically asked him a good question, which is what is some of the underlying substance that you disagree with? And his response was, here are some highlighted messages in an email that I copy pasted from www.COVID lab leak is true and I leaked my diarrhea in your mom's mouth.com. That's not a real answer. And I don't know why you would pretend that's a real answer or why you would accept that as an answer. You should re-ask the question. Excuse me, what is some of the underlying substance? Because that's the whole reason why you're saying any of these things are bad, right? You're saying that the credibility of these people is under threat because of the emails that you're going to show on the next slide. So what is the underlying substance that you might think would be negatively impacted by the fact that these people's experience is called into question? For example, when we went through Andrew Wakefield's bullshit study on autism and vaccines, one of the claims is that him being an expert witness to a law firm, okay, that is threatening or that's trying to file a lawsuit on behalf of parents blaming the MMR vaccines, right? We were saying, oh, that's a conflict of interest. That's not enough. Just to say that it's a conflict of interest doesn't necessarily say that the research is bad. But then when we go a step further and then we analyze some of the underlying data, right, of those 12 subjects, and we see, oh, well, they were polling these people from anti-vacciner groups. Some of these people were plaintiffs in these cases that now had a financially motivated reason to maybe present the data in a particular way. And then when we found out they actually lied, supposedly, or no, he did because he lost all those lawsuits about this, about the underlying data. Well, there you go. We've shown a potential problem. We've connected to an actual problem, and then we've demonstrated how the research is flawed due to the actual problem. You have to go through that process. $100,000 debate, guys. Well, you're trying to prove your whole fucking logic system. We should be able to do this.
No, that's all.
Okay. On slide 51, you said before January 18th, they needed a connection to the market for a diagnosis. And I want to know, when did that start? Because obviously, at some point, they didn't know about the market. So there must have been a starting period when... And also...
I think this whole thing started December 31st. I don't remember.
And
maybe Peter seems to be much better memory than me.
Who is beholden to these?
He doesn't even know when the hypothesis for the research started. He doesn't have a clear starting point for it. Isn't that like essential? Because you're claiming that their entire theory is based on these like retrospective biased opinions that are locked priors or whatever.
Recommendations. Is this like a specific hospital is doing this? Is this all of China?
So I think what happens is they send like a kind of message to all hospitals that this is something that's going on. Pay attention. This was from the CDC, I think. The CDC issued this message. I need to check.
To the Chinese hospitals, our CDC did, or their CDC did, or
can you clarify your question? I'll answer it offline.
I guess the trouble is that I'm not clear. So both of you, at many different points, talk about the cases that we know about, cases we know about at the time, cases we know about retrospectively, and the sampling biases. And I think it's actually quite hard for me to get a handle on where there are sampling biases and what the source of the sampling biases are. And I just in general, I want to have a better idea of exactly.
Like he's asking a good question because, for instance, let's say that there was a New York Times article that was published on December 21st saying, no one has ever looked at the wet markets, and that's a problem. And then let's say on December 24th, a scientist emails another scientist saying, hey, did you see this New York Times article? And then let's say on December 27th, his institution takes up a grant or starts to publish research or papers or public messages saying, we think it's the wet markets. Oh, well, now you have a very clear line of retrospective bias. I don't know if it's a real phrase or not, but you've got a very clear line of selection bias or cherry picking data to try to fit some narrative that originated from the New York Times, right? Because that's part of your claim is that these are trapped priors and these are people with biases. So where did it even start to not even know that?
And this is related to the fact that many times both of you showed maps of like case counts, and I'm never sure like what times. Are we talking about cases in December? Are we talking about cases through the whole Wuhan outbreak?
Okay, so I'll tell you my impression. So we tried to dig into early cases, and it's a mess. I mean, there's
no one is. He didn't ask you about early cases. He said, where did the wet market theory start from?
So much information, so many contradictions. There's this 200-page report just about early cases, each hospital, what happened. This is not something we think is reasonable to analyze with confidence.
You don't think knowing where the first few cases started isn't reasonable to analyze with confidence? You mean you just don't trust it, or?
And I don't think it's important because
is that important? It doesn't matter. If you could confirm a case in October, that would blow out of the water everything that everybody's like. What?
Actually, we thought the market was an important coincidence, at this point, we're fine with saying that the market is the only big cluster at the time. So it doesn't really matter. So yeah, so we can just accept that, and we don't care about biases or no. Yeah.
Okay, and then I guess I was going to ask a few slides later. You talked about someone who's diagnosed only because of a relative. I guess you're saying this is not important. I wanted to
about
ask.
Chen?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is a bit different. So there's a difference between saying that the market is the only cluster. That's one thing, and it's very different from saying that the market is everything. Okay. So we're definitely saying that the market, that there are a significant number of cases outside the market. Okay, that's definitely something we're saying. We're just saying that they didn't manage to create a big cluster anywhere. Okay, so definitely Chen is important because Chen shows you have someone pretty early, which cannot be connected to the market, and we know the bias. We know why he was noticed because he has a friend in the central hospital, and the central hospitals are the ones that have the better sequencing abilities, right? So
the 200-page paper, he said, is low reliability. He doesn't care about that. But this singular person, is, or?
We think this case illustrates that there are a few dozen cases at least around Wuhan that no one knows about.
Just a quick question. Do you know when the first case outside of Wuhan was? Sorry.
Betsy, is this giving you flashbacks to when you first got into debates and thought they were going to be substantive before you realized how nonsense a grift was? A little bit, but this is just, ugh.
I don't remember now.
It's Beijing on December 17th.
I kind of expected mine to be a joke because it's like online people on YouTube and shit. These weren't moderated judge debates with fucking PowerPoints that we'd made.
So if it can get to Beijing in 6 days, and that guy was actually market linked, is how we know about it. So we're sure it's export from the market. But if it can get across China in 6 days or 7 days, I think it can make it across Wuhan in 1 day less than that.
Yeah, I mean, but I don't think it's weird that there's someone who was to the market and then went to Beijing. That happens. The question is, we have someone who says, "I'm not going anywhere. I'm just living in a suburb,"
Yeah.
and can't point to anything that's related to the market. And he's 16 or 8 December case.
My question
So,
about
It's been spreading for a few weeks. So you don't think there will be any cases in town that aren't market linked?
I'm not saying there won't be. I'm saying that the fact that we have this case and we know in that case specifically, there's a good reason why we know about it because they go to central hospital. That's a coincidence that you need to point out because why don't we have 3 other cases in suburban clinics, right?
But it seems like you're going out of your way to ignore the 174 cases, but you're focusing on the one case.
Yeah.
As just proven.
This is all of December, right? By December 16, I don't think we have 174, right?
Correct. So he's maybe the first non-market linked, and there's always going to be a first non-market linked.
Yeah, sure. Of course, it's going to be a first non-market link, but it happens to be the one where he has a good reason to go to the central hospital, which others would not. So that is a
But if
significant.
it wasn't the market, it would be 100 to 1 cases that aren't linked. This proves that it's really, that's the thing. If there's 100 cases and there's 5 hospitalized at the market, then it's the market, because that's the hospitalization rate. And if it's not 100 cases, if it's 1,000 cases, then you should expect a lot more non-market linked at that point in time.
Right, but if it's 200,
Sure, yeah, you can make up some
okay.
number that fits in that
No,
window.
it's not about making up a number. That's what
the
the evidence
only-
means, right?
The only question I had is, do you know when he was diagnosed?
Yeah, I can look at that.
Because
So
I'm assuming he wasn't diagnosed on December 16th because nobody
Yeah,
knew what
look it
COVID
up.
was on December 16th.
yeah,
So he must have been diagnosed retrospectively. It wasn't a very
I'll look
important
it up. Continue in the meantime.
question. Okay, let's see, and
I would, Eric, if you're okay, I would argue that we move towards giving closing unless you have some other pressing bits.
okay, let me just.
We're pushing up on 6:15 now, or I mean 6 hours 15 minutes.
Okay.
Chen was sequenced on December 26. I don't know if that's considered diagnosis, but he was sequenced, so I assumed.
That's good enough. One last small question on slide 85. You talk about Sarah talks about breach of containment is more likely during the move of the Wuhan CDC. And I just want to know if you have any information about whether bat coronaviruses would have been involved in this move, because it sounded like from what Peter said that there wouldn't, in which case the move should not be significant in that respect. If you have any information about like materials being moved, not just people, that would be relevant to the breach of containment.
No. He has nothing.
Is this to
No.
me? The question is to me?
Yeah.
Yes.
No.
I don't know. We were just hypothesizing that such
No.
a move would be disruptive in that sense.
You were hypothesizing? If the market is the epicenter, the CDC moved its laboratories on the 2nd of December 2019 to a location close to the market, leading to a higher probability of a breach of containment, but you don't even know what they were moving, so then why even bother having this?
We don't have specific information, and again, this is like really like the last line of defense. I don't know if we're going to get there, but I can try and see if there's. I don't know how we can find like it's not the kind of information we can find online, but
I just want to make
about
sure that everything potentially contentious gets challenged. So,
Okay.
Okay, and then I guess I have a few small questions I wanted to run through for Peter, if you're okay, before we switch to
Yeah. Sorry, one thing I just wanted to answer your previous question, the question about bias. My claim is that the search was unbiased before December 29th in the early hospitals. because no one has publicly announced that there's the connection. And I'm saying that the search is biased after December 29th for some period, and you can tell that the percent market cases go up, actually, market linked. And then on January 18th, then they remove the market linked, and the percentage goes back down again. So I'm saying it's more or less unbiased after that. And I also pointed out that 127 of the 174 were diagnosed after that was removed. You can still, hypothesize some other form of bias, and it's hard because it has to fit the whole part where most of the cases they find are unlinked, and many of them, or some of them at least, are very far away. So I don't really know what form of bias would find that. Also, Warby's paper considered every form of bias as one of their arguments. They tried to sequentially removing the cases closest to the market to see how many you could remove before the association was lost. And you could remove, you can remove like half to 2/3, depending on how you're doing the math here, before you lose the association, and it just matches equally well with the population density center. So even if you could imagine there's some other form of bias, it still has to be extremely strong before it's relevant.
Okay, so Peter, a quick question. Maybe this is more for next session. Do you have any thoughts on whether the Wuhan Institute of Virology might have been inadequately handling materials that were contagious? Because this was important to Sar's argument that the situation is there for a lab leak. I want to know, do you agree?
I don't know. I think it's probably exaggerated, but I don't think my argument really relies on that. I think most of my argument is the many lines of reasoning that show that the most recent common ancestor is at the market, and the geographical association with the market, the early cases with the market, multiple lines of reasoning linking the outbreak to the market, not the lab, and then you just have this very rare coincidence of how it got there. And then on the lab side in week 2, I'm going to point out things like all their work was done in different backbones. Like normally they plug a spike into a WIV1 backbone because they're concerned with SARS viruses and they want to know what happens if you tweak SARS, things like that. And the Frank site doesn't look natural. So I don't think my argument is really going to rely too heavily on I know what their exact procedures were.
Okay, and I think...
Also, they do this work in pseudoviruses frequently, which can't infect people. That's something that's neglected in this debate. The whole gain of function is rising. You also need to account for the fact that we have advanced experimental techniques like pseudoviruses, where you can do more experimentation safer.
Okay. We'll probably hear more about that next time, I guess. Yeah. And then my last question.
Okay, we'll do it next time. Yeah.
True.
Is you claimed you attributed some significance to the fact that SARS-1 and SARS-2 spilled over in the same month, and I want to know if there a reason why spillover events should be seasonal as opposed to just.
I wrote 1 in 12 in my probabilities, and that's definitely too high. I figured we were going to negotiate that down. I'm happy to say 1 in 6. I think SAR even said 1 in 4, and I wasn't trying to pull one over on you guys. I was ready to argue that down. I could make the same argument November versus December. It is important to realize that COVID is not a particularly seasonal virus. It can spread in summer. I just caught it in summer, and it could leak at any month of the year. So we're looking for every piece of evidence we can. That's a small one. I don't think that factor of 4. I think there's a problem here in that both SAR and I think our arguments are very strong, and it would take this overwhelming evidence to overturn them. And I don't know if we're going to end this debate actually not believing that at the rate we're going, but I'm optimistic that we can make some progress in seeing, where we both agree and disagree.
There was a slight distinction I'm making. I'm not asking about whether COVID is seasonal. I'm asking whether spillover events should be seasonal. And I'm not aware of any particular reason it should be.
Well, so on the human side, remember how we boosted cities because of the density
Yes.
and deprioritized rural areas. So you also are going to have higher transmission rates in winter, and that's going to be an extra factor on that 30x.
Why though?
And that might be why, even though it could spill over multiple times, but
Why is there a higher transmission rate in winter? I have no idea. Is it immune system is generally weaker in winter, or what?
it's going to stick better as a pandemic in winter.
I see.
That might be why.
I'm a
Or
little
maybe
reluctant
because
I feel like
maybe because people are inside more because it's colder, so it's more likely. Oh, that's probably
biology
it.
has not definitively come to understand exactly why flu virus and so on are seasonal. And to go from flu virus is seasonal to COVID pandemic and spillover is seasonal, I'd feel better about it if I understood where we started.
Yeah, we don't.
Okay.
So we only have a few data points, and actually HKU1 seems to also be a winter in China thing, but that one's really hard to contact trace, so we don't know it as well as SARS or SARS-2. So if you want to drop the factor of 4, I'm not going to be angry. If you want to drop the factor of 10,000 because SARS says the market's equally likely to be the animals or the mahjong room, then I've done a bad job making my case today, or we need to talk about that more.
I want to ask there just because I thought there was a basis of the claim. I thought it was a bat immune system claim for spillover likelihood or transmissibility likelihood. Not that it's important, but
I guess if more bats are sick, then more spillover can happen. Is that?
That's what I thought.
I'm trying to understand the coincidence, and I don't know if it's important. I did find papers explaining that there is a sharp spike in bat virus seasonality in September, October, and Yunnan, I believe, was the cave they were looking at.
Okay. Not super important.
I don't know how fast it gets from bats to intermediate to humans, so there's a lot of unknowns here. And we don't know that for SARS, we don't know that for COVID, we don't even know the intermediate for HKU1.
Okay, well, thank you for your patience with all my questions. That was most of them.
Thank you.
So if you want to give any closing arguments.
Me? Sure. 2 minutes. Let me see if I can share my screen again. Can you yield the screen, Sar? Or whoever's sharing? So I think this is one of the key things that we were talking about, and I don't think SAR is steel manning here. So the first point, 15%, I worked that out in the Zhao Zhao paper. 7 of 17 shops are this market. So yeah, I could say it could be another market. There's 4 of them. This one is actually the one with the most shops, but you could call that, lower, 41%. And I don't see why TCM hospitals are relevant. Restaurants maybe, depends. He said, no infected vendor when really it's 1 of 7 for the SARS outbreak. So, and this is even harder to contact trace. No animals were tested, so I don't know what the relevance of not finding a animal is, or no relevant animals. Best explanation, he's ignored the 2 spillovers.
1 minute.
Every excuse of bias he's come up with has fallen apart so far, as I can tell, so I don't understand why he's still using that. Lineage A, yeah. And the Mahjong board, is not relevant as far as I've demonstrated. So steel manning these, and not giving these 100% necessarily, but just making up as many examples why you don't like it, I don't think is a convincing argument against it. What do I have, 30 seconds? Yeah, I think he's making up a lot of numbers here. And I went over this one. This will be good to keep working on though in the next debate because these are really important. And I would close with a quote from Mark Twain. There are 3 kinds of lies: lies, damned lies, and statistics.
Will, you're muted, but I'm assuming you're handing control over to Sar.
Yes, sorry, 8 minutes and 32 seconds.
And sorry, just to be clear, I think if there's leftover time when you're done with conclusion, you'll just have it next time.
Sorry, what do you suggest?
I was saying if there's leftover time from your concluding marks, then we'll just adjust it next time.
No, I'll just go quickly over my. I'll go over quickly over my comments on clock. Over my comments on Peter's presentation. So just go over the main problems. So there were some issues about Wuhan being claimed to be an unlikely. That a lot of people claim Wuhan is not likely. We're not saying that. We're just saying it's one of. It's an equal probability we give it. That's not important. It's important to remember all the differences from SARS-1 that had multiple spillovers. It had more genetic diversity at the start. We'll discuss next time. It's clear how it got to Guangdong. We had a positive sample, so important to look also at the differences and not only similarities. So there are several claims about that making Hubei especially likely. I mean, in order to determine that, we need to see an objective comparison of all the provinces under the parameters and see that Hubei comes up. I mean, of course, in retrospect, you can find anything you want that is specific to Hubei.
Okay.
What else is interesting here? Saying that WIV is far from the market, it's not too important because we don't expect the lab to be where the infection starts, but actually where the lab worker frequents. We discussed this, that we need to add other countries. So here we accepted the density and added 2x, so that's a correction we made. So here there's a claim that Hubei is not banning events. This is for the time being, and then later we see that the whole of China stopped banning wildlife after SARS-2. So probably, these things, a lot of these things that try to single out Hubei seem to me to be cherry-picked in retrospect. I'm willing to be proven otherwise. Just need to see a process whereby you compare all the provinces and see what happens. Okay. Okay, this is an important one. So this is the.
Is he discovering his slides in real time?
This is the calculation that eventually Peter does that goes to the billions. So when I see so we did this very similar calculation that produces the 1.2% per year, and the main differences are having a suitable virus. So given what we know about Manal 52 and the missing non-published viruses, I think it's likely that they would have one. It's a problem they created because that's what diffuse says. So once they decide to do diffuse, then it's they're likely to reach a virus like that. Probability of escape given BSL2 we discussed very likely and spreading in Wuhan. Make it across down to the market without spreading elsewhere. We don't agree that is the case. And about the lab successfully hitting all the evidence, we'll discuss the behavioral evidence in the last session. But definitely, we're not talking billions here. This is something that is pretty much likely. Important thing is that Peter said that we're claiming that it happened in the BSL2 lab, but we're saying BSL4 is WFV having BSL4 makes Wuhan more unique. So this is a very important distinction. BSL4 is a proxy for the extent of virology research. The fact that they have BSL4 in Wuhan means that that's an important hub for virology. The fact that they specifically did SARS-2 and BSL2, that makes the case worse, not better. It doesn't bring up all the BSL2s across China to be relevant. It just the BSL4 is only an indication. We're looking for an indication of how unique is Wuhan in that sense. In that sense, the BSL4 is an indication. We're using much stronger evidence for that in our analysis, but just important to understand what BSL4 is about. Yeah, so the work of WFV is much more significant than any of these. So any case where, ridiculing people who make weird lab leaks theories, that's fine with us. People are weird. That's not a problem. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So the example of using cholera for centering the source of the epidemic, this is very different because cholera isn't airborne. It doesn't have much human-to-human transmission. Many of these people were actually infected directly by the water pump. Yeah, and it's also before we had advanced transportation in cities. So this whole case and equating it to the centering of cases in Huanan is very shaky. Yeah, so these are many options. This is the option. None of these is the option we reached at. Conditions of market make a good superspreading location. There's possibly one of several, but was noticed due to biases. So the last sentence, we're willing to concede it, even though we think it's correct. It's not important. Okay, we talked about that. Yeah, so this is like okay. There's a lot of work to do in early cases. If it comes down to that, we probably need to have a whole session just on that. It's very complicated. Yeah, we talked about that. Here, this is we showed it as a table. Here, you see it as a map. That actually, the district of the market is lower than its surrounding in terms of seropositivity. Yeah, we talked about the importance of taking into account the other map of all-cause mortality, not only pneumonia. Okay. Yeah, so the whole issue about the moat and valley, how it's called, yeah, we're not doing that. Our CDC claim is very specific.
Okay.
Yeah, all the things about dates we don't find very important. It could eventually come up to be important, but we'll if we get there. This was interesting. The fact that there wasn't any event that could be an alternative to why Wuhan was important. So we didn't know that. So that's strengthening the case that WAV is responsible compared to something else. Yeah, I think I'm running out of time there. So yeah, that's about it. See you in 2 weeks.
I think my last 6 seconds, all inference is human inference.
All right, wow, thank you very much. This was quite the marathon session today.
Thanks, that was fun. Thanks for the patience. You guys are great.
That was awesome, guys. It's really cool to see two people who put in so much work.
Definitely.
And thank you, Sar, for making this contest. This is like, there's no place to like challenge these beliefs, except on Twitter. And Twitter conversation is terrible. And it's fun to actually talk and like figure out what's right and wrong. And I don't know.
Wow.
Thank you for challenging. It's really you're the first one to ever go the distance.
Only guy dumb enough.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, quickly.
Jesus. All right, good job. We got through about 6 hours, okay? Almost halfway done. Summarizing. Oh, maybe we don't have to do the summarizing one. So maybe just these 3 videos and then the decision? Jesus. So maybe just these 3 videos. I'm curious about the other guy that he brings in to debate this next part. I don't know why he's allowed to swap somebody, but